I guess we might as well get started here. So the purpose of this meeting today is to sort of debrief about the two recent meetings that came up, the RECOVER TLC and the HHS meeting with Secretary Kennedy. I'm thinking we can start off with the TLC one and sort of discuss that one for like 30 minutes and then discuss the other one. And I'm guessing it'll go even longer than that since we tend to do that, but we can just start off with those. So I'm wondering if anybody wants to sort of give a summary of the RECOVER TLC meeting just to start. I can do it if nobody wants to, but it'd be nice to have some other people. Okay, I'll just do something quick and then we can jump into other people adding to it and kind of freeform from there. So the RECOVER TLC meeting happened in Bethesda, September 9th and 10th. It was run by the Foundation for the NIH. And it was the second annual meeting that they had. There was a first one in 2024 last year. Few people from our team attended. So Isabel, John, Tara, and I were all there, as well as Sam Keating. And Megan was there. We got to meet in person. And I invited Playgrat here because they did a really great job live tweeting the event. I see Emily's here. I see some other familiar faces. So we'll just I'll just kind of go through quickly. So the purpose of the meeting, RECOVER TLC, is focused on the clinical trials as opposed to the larger RECOVER initiative, which does a lot of like biomarkers and collecting samples. And they've done some clinical trials, but the TLC is just specifically about trials. So they last year, or I guess it was earlier this year, gathered treatment ideas from the community. And they're actually still accepting them. So I'll be putting some links in the chat as we're talking. Maybe somebody can confirm, but I'm trying to remember exactly how much is earmarked for TLC right now to fund trials. I was thinking 550, but I've seen numbers anywhere from 300 to 550. So if anybody knows that, you can speak up. In the meeting this year, they went over 4 different trials, specific interventions that they're looking at, including low-dose naltrexone, baricitinib, GLP-1 receptor agonists, and the stellate ganglion block. And they discussed, so I kind of went into details of what they're thinking for each of those trials. And then there was some talks about biomarkers, and then kind of talked about different theories, and then we had a space gaps. Oh, Isabel just said, is the comment section off? I don't know how to change that. This is just the second time doing this space, so I'm not sure. If anybody else knows, let me know. So yeah, we had a sort of a gaps in the ideas panel and then talked about next steps. And like I said, the link for submitting new agents is still open. They're still ongoing. Megan brought up some really good questions right at the end of the meeting about how much funding they still have for the trials. So there's still a lot of open questions about that. So just kind of, really high picture overview. So I'm hoping a few people here can sort of jump in and give your thoughts about how you thought that the meeting went, sort of anything else you want to discuss.
I think the organization of the meeting and having patient participation was great. I think that I sensed still a lot of hesitation for really taking into account the patient feedback. And that's one of the things that was on the frustrating side of the meeting. Um, Certainly not being able to give an account of the financials was also frustrating. Um, I think one of the positive sides is that even though the design of the study is not ideal, moving forward with GLP-1 at this stage of the game shows a willingness to consider sort of more outside of the box treatments that are geared towards improving function in patients, than waiting for the off-label use for years and years before moving forward with trials, like we've seen in other cases. So that was a positive for me. But again, the design of the study is not following what's being seen on the clinical side. And to that end, I just posted on the Renegade Research account our upcoming roundtable. So save the date for October 17th. We're going to have Dr. Kaufman, Dr. Ruhoy, and Dr. Dempsey talking about how they're using the dual GLP-1 GIP receptor agonists in their clinical practice. Dr. Kaufman was one of the presenters, and he spoke about seeing 50 to 70% improvement in his patients at microdose. So that was certainly very encouraging, and why I wanted to get him on, and others who are using it, to talk to other clinicians in the patient community about how is this working, and then we can compare, and clinicians can certainly gain their own understanding about how to use it in their practices versus what the trial will be. That's it. I'm getting winded.
Okay.
Tess, this is Ellie.
Mhm.
The comments go under the tweet that you did at Renegade Research for the
Oh,
space.
okay.
That's where we comment that where we had a running conversation before.
I see.
So
Okay.
I just posted one to get it started.
All right. Trying to see that. Okay. Now, yeah. Okay. I see your comment now.
Last time there was something in here that was like the square that
I don't.
shows that you can directly comment on, but I don't see that now.
Yeah, I wasn't paying attention to that last time, so I don't know. I don't know if there's a setting I can change or anything. Okay, people can raise hands if you want to speak, or if you're a speaker, just hop in here.
Yeah, so it's sort of reflecting back on thinking about Recover over the years and last year's meeting and this year's meeting. Um, last year was at NIH, and there were the panels, a number of people kind of getting up in the middle row, or middle aisle and asking questions, but there was more sort of push. And then in this year, it felt a little more collaborative. But overall, it still strikes me that there needs to be a way to just move this stuff faster. So, and to give more chances for something to work. Um, here are 4 drugs, and some of those are kind of generally well known. Maybe there's some novelty showing, but ultimately, 4 drugs with trials that are going to take a lot of years doesn't do a lot for changing care in the time frame needed by the patients. And I use as a comparator the Treat Me survey study that Martha Eckerly, I always forget how to pronounce her last name, but anyway, the farm doc from Twitter, that ended up getting 4,000 responses compared everything to vitamin C to normalize it, and had some really meaningful findings that were put to clinical use 2 or 3 years ago at really zero cost, and how to scale things like that, or looking at the fasting eating study that was in Nature that the Tom Bunker did on just, hey, getting it out there. Who wants to try it? Had IRB and wrote it up and got results that are meaningful. And Troy's on here, and some of the nicotine things, and certainly some of what we've tried to do in Renegade research. But just I want to throw that out to see if there are any responses or other ideas about how to accelerate this stuff now, and also going forward as new opportunities for funding may come forward.
Any of the speakers can feel free to jump in, or if you're a listener right now, you can request to speak.
I just wanted to ask really quickly about the GLP-1s, if there are any folks who have been having discussions about basically government insurance authorization, because for anyone who's on government insurance, we have to have it approved for the targeted reasons, right? Which are moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea and diabetes. So things like insulin resistance, right? And glucose processing issues and prediabetes, which are common with our conditions, are not covered reasons. And obesity is not a covered reason either. So folks who are not able to exercise or have exercise limitations, who end up gaining weight, aren't able to access these things that way either. So I think it's kind of important that we're at least making government folks aware, of this ongoing issue for coverage access for people who are on government insurance, because a lot of people can't afford to pay for these things out of pocket, and we keep having these ongoing conversations about affordability equals accessibility. And I wanted to know what y'all have been discussing about this already, if any of you have been. Thanks.
One thing to bring up is that, this is Ellie, on that, is we're talking about microdosing. So even if people don't have coverage, they might be able to afford a small amount to try microdosing.
And I think that the roundtable on the 17th will shed more light as to how patients are accomplishing that. But one area that sometimes people are not aware of is that if you qualify financially, the pharmaceutical companies do have patient assistance programs that, depending on income, the medication can even be free as long as you do have a prescription.
I wanted to bring up a few different points to address the ones already mentioned. So the first thing is that I agree that the trial
I'm not getting any sound.
Okay.
Is it just me?
I wasn't sure if it was my internet. Not hearing anything either. Yeah, we can't hear you, Plague Rat. Okay.
I'm at the edge of my seat, though, just dying to know what they want to say.
Yeah, let's see if they're going to come back in. Oh, looks like Megan was able to come up as a speaker now. So I was hoping that there was going to be some people from the FDA again this year. I watched one of the recordings from last year, and I think that question of how we can actually get quicker approval of the interventions I think that's going to be really important. I don't have much knowledge about how we can actually do that. You know, how I know in the Kennedy meeting that also came up with the FDA, but definitely think that's a big issue to actually get the approval of it in order to then get insurance to pay and everything. Did you have something to add, John?
I was just going to say another regulatory piece that would be extraordinarily helpful would be any kind of a declared public health emergency. So during the public health emergency, at a federal level, exceptions to cross state line practice and telemedicine and so on were it could get taken care of very simply. And once that expired, it's no longer the case. So in a public health emergency can be for one condition if somebody chooses to do it. And it's something the secretary, I think, has the authority to do. Others on the call may know the details.
And does anybody else know more about that?
Hey, this is Megan. I can speak to that if it's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure. Hey, everybody, this is Megan from Long COVID Campaign. The question about declaring a public health emergency, when an HHS secretary does so, it unlocks a bunch of already legally guaranteed authorities that range from, FDA provisions to being able to move money around. And that's actually how we got a big infusion of funding into RECOVER previously. It actually came from something called the Public Health Emergencies Fund. And that was actually moved into RECOVER through the action of the previous HHS secretary. So if you think about how RECOVER got all this money, right? So there was 1.15 billion that was funded by Congress originally in 2021. And then last year we saw two announcements. So there was $147 million that went to RECOVER in 2024 that they moved around internally. And that built upon the $515 million that was allocated earlier in the year when COVID was still considered a public health emergency. So that was an infusion of additional $662 million. So that's how you get to 1.8 billion for those keeping track of the maths here. And 300 million of that is what was announced as dedicated to trials through RECOVER TLC. And just to frame, declaring a public health emergency, if you go to the HHS webpage and look this up, you'll see there's a number of concerns that you may not be aware have already been declared public health emergencies. So, things like the opioid crisis that's been declared repeatedly a public health emergency. So, I think it's an important request to continue to put forward as part of a larger menu of requests to the administration, with everything that's been happening and, see what we can get to yes on. Sometimes you're surprised, about what folks feel like could be a pathway forward, and other things that seem really doable don't fit, for some reason with their strategies. So I'm a big fan of coming in with some tiered asks, and I think this is an important one to include. And maybe they don't declare a public health emergency, but what it does create is a way for the administration, kind of in the way that we saw at the roundtable last week on Thursday, to kind of marshal the full resources that are already in play with the authority that the HHS secretary has to then also lean on all these different agencies like FDA and ARPA-H and CDC and NIH, et cetera, to do something that may be quite similar and may not require declaring a public health emergency per se. So we could, get to some of the same outcomes potentially through political will with or without declaring a public health emergency. But I think it's a great ask to include to see how we can get there, however, whatever the wrapper around it is, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And an added benefit on the public health emergency is the ability to change some of the cross-state practice patterns, which are particularly important or potentially important with telemedicine, so people don't have to go in. And also just when there are limited numbers of practitioners.
Yeah, that'd be huge.
In the meantime, though,
Isabel?
yeah. In the meantime, I think it's also important for people to know, number one, about the, pharmaceutical companies' financial assistance program, and also with your own insurance. Each insurance has what's called a formulary. And in that formulary, they list the tiers at which each medication within each category that that medication is approved for falls under. So you can, have a better chance of getting things approved if you go to that list, which insurance companies always have to have them publicly, and you look at, let's say you want to have a particular GLP-1, you go to their website and you see what tier it falls under and what the indication is for, and then you can work with your provider. So for example, I have sleep apnea, so that's a category that I qualify for. And since we all have a number of comorbidities, your doctor can work with you in order to do that prior authorization in a way that's much more likely to be accepted at the other end by the insurance company. Of course, they can also, justify off-label use with the insurance company, but that is a much more difficult battle to win. But those are steps that can be taken ahead of time in order to, to have a higher likelihood of getting that medication approved.
Thank you. I think Megan, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I could just give maybe a couple minutes trying to pull together these events if it's helpful or service to folks. And as ever, take what you like of this and leave the rest. I know there's just so many different patient needs, perspectives, lived experiences. Different groups have different places where they're focusing. So I'm just a huge believer and we have to make space for a very big tent. And welcome how everyone feels able and led to engage. So again, if, sharing this is just my personal kind of take, and take what of this works for you and feel free to leave the rest. So, I'm actually in New York right now at the UN summit meetings. There was a gathering of high-level leaders this morning to talk about the pandemic in the past tense and to talk about future pandemics. And this was a brave attempt to show up and try to remind these folks that we've got 400 million people globally who are very much present tense, needing help, not looking at lessons learned in the past and not looking to future threats, need help today and need help for tests and therapeutics, which is really lost in the mix here. But the reason that I raise that specifically is, what I can tell you from the meetings I've gone to is just that there has been the public health, global health space is really in disarray right now, whether that's, trying to figure out how to fund previously funded work and philanthropic leaders and foundations not being sure how to fill those gaps in the best way yet and really being stretched. What I came away even just today with is deep gratitude for how our patient community has been able to advocate across the board in the United States, because the amount of funding and the traction that we do have, although it has not moved as fast as we want it to, it hasn't looked the way that we've wanted it to. And I think a number of, groups, folks, individual advocates have been very vocal about that. We sure have, but we're actually positioned in a really important place. And I think it's important to say out loud. And the reason I stress that is because if we then look at the roundtable last week on Thursday that Secretary Kennedy convened, kind of taken in the same time as what happened at RECOVER TLC, right? Because these two moments really have a handshake in terms of what does it all mean? Like, what do we do next? And what can patients and advocates do? I'm a big fan of President Reagan's famous quote, like, trust but verify. I'll say that that applies to politicians of any party or no party, elected officials, appointed officials in any administration. What I will say is I think it's important to recognize that 2 weeks ago that the new NIH director, Dr. Bhattacharya, did actually make progress in announcing, this first slate of trials. And for folks that were digging into that, it was the 4 trials that were announced. They kind of put them in these buckets of pivotal, which included the low-dose naltrexone, trial that's going to be for children and adolescents, which is an important development. I really want to shout out Long COVID Families and Megan for all of their work. This has been a real labor of love, and this is not taken for granted that the NIH is starting to look to kids and adolescents. So we really got to give them some flowers here. And then mechanistic trials, that's the GLP-1 and the stellate ganglion block. And then they considered the baricitinib and air quotes in between trial, which is, as we know, it's expanding this existing trial of that immune modulating drug that was already in motion. What it's going to help that trial do is get completed faster by expanding sites for enrollment. So that's what was announced. I think, like all of us, we know what's missing there, right? We have a long list. People have forwarded a lot of lists. People have built a lot of websites, and they've been forwarded to the websites. They've been in Excel spreadsheets. Like, I don't think we're confused at this point about the options, right? But obviously the big things that were missing were monoclonal antibodies, antivirals, either singularly or in a multi-drug cocktail, immune therapy options, things like B-cell reduction, CFR inhibitors, et cetera. And then, of course, like biomarker assays and tests, which isn't necessarily what RECOVER TLC was going to do, but is a critical need that we know that has not been addressed, and we've been calling for just stridently for years. So, what I will say is, I think it's important just to recognize that the NIH director announced these initial 4 trials, and that's progress. And, when I watched the video, and folks can watch it online, of what the NIH director's message was to open up that gathering for RECOVER TLC 2 weeks ago, it was extremely supportive, and it stated the current administration's support for continued long COVID research. We should not take that as a given. That took just critical work across the advocacy and patient space over the last, close to a year. And, if you kind of take us back a year ago, we didn't know at all. It was not promised that that would be the kind of message or announcement that we got 2 weeks ago. It could have been very easy that this research stopped completely, that the funding was moved to a different priority or to very different kinds of potential trials, or just gone, and so I hope everyone feels like they're part of that progress. Like, that is a huge moment. And I think when you then consider what happened last week at the roundtable and Thursday at HHS, we saw a gathering, which is frankly one we've been calling for several years. We saw the HHS secretary bringing together the head of the FDA, so critical to John's point earlier, the acting head of the CDC, the acting head of ARPA-H, which is a high-risk, high-reward specialized research agency in the US government. We were able to get language included in appropriations last year and again this year under a new majority with the Republicans on the Senate side to ask ARPA-H to take on long COVID in addition to the NIH work, right? Because we need to broaden the portfolio of funding and approaches across the US government, also including CDMRP, which is a program out of DOD that we know at least 4 studies have also applied for funding. And that was another win that patients secured. So again, I hope everyone feels really proud of how they contributed, and however they had spoons to give to that, thank you. But we saw this gathering also including the NIH director, and, speeches are speeches, statements are statements. But all I can say is what I've learned about advocacy is when people make public commitments, act as if they mean to keep them, and work with them to try to ensure they keep them. And if they keep them or they don't keep them, the work that we do as advocates along the way is the same work we need to do anyway. I do feel like there's an opening right now with the current administration, and I think it behooves all of us as individual advocates and as organizations and, groups to push. And that just leaves me with the last point I would make, which is that I think now is the time to start to put forward proposals about how to spend the remaining funding. My question at RECOVER TLC was, can we put on a green visor here? How are we supposed to talk about what should be in or out of a portfolio of investment when we don't even know how much money is left or how it's being spent? If this was HIV/AIDS, we would be able to say exactly what percentage of the NIH's expenditures to date or moving forward would go to different theories of how we would go after solving that public health challenge, right? And we need to get there and get there rapidly. it's a new administration, it's a new NIH director. I think this is a great question to bring to folks, building off of the HHS roundtable last week. If all of us think about a paycheck, you spend your paycheck real different on day one versus the last day before you get paid again, right? So, it's like we got struggle meals at the end, and at the beginning, you might be going to a steak dinner. We're not at the steak dinner point here. And I think it's just really important for people to know that we may not get additional funding for quite a while, but we do have a healthy pot of existing funding that has not been allocated yet. And so I think it's just really critical that we get down to brass tacks, what is left, and how can we start to analyze this portfolio across the different groups. And everyone's going to have different perspectives, but what do we recommend needs to happen with the resources that are still there? What's missing? What hasn't been invested in? And I hope that all the groups will avail themselves of this opening, and hopefully push. Just one last point I'll make, I just really want to shout out everybody, every single group, every single patient and advocate, because we have actually made long COVID into a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue. And I think we saw that really strongly at this gathering last week, where we saw Hill champions that just thank you to everyone who's called those offices, reached out, done meetings. I've been working very closely with them for about a year and a half now. And I've been really grateful for their engagement, their care, and their willingness to continue working with the patient community. That is only possible because of everyone that has reached out and shared what they need, as a patient or as a caregiver, as an ally. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for that, and don't take that for granted. That's a really important opening for us right now. And so I hope we'll take it. I hope some of that was helpful. Thanks for letting me share a little bit.
Yeah, 100% helpful. I'm really glad that you were able to make it today. And I'll second the thanks for everybody that has been involved in the advocacy side. I feel like there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't even hear about. So Isabel, were you going to add something, and then we'll go to Mike?
Yeah, just adding a thank you to Megan for everything that you do. And also, one of the things that was encouraging about the HHS meeting last week was the realization that the RECOVER data has been very hard to access, and that something may be done differently about that, so that research can move forward in different ways for the money that has already been spent.
Thank you. Okay, Mike?
Yeah, and I'll just follow up on that. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure you can hear me first.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Isabel, what did you just say?
The realization last week, so Secretary Kennedy didn't seem to be aware that, the data from RECOVER was not easy for other researchers to access. And analyze different aspects, and talked about changing that.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought. So on the data, there is so much data out there right now. And I'm just a patient, right? So I didn't come from this scientific world, but I have been working with, people, started working with them through RECOVER and then learning how it all works. And the whole model is a mess. But one thing is, a good example of that is, there is a lot of data out there that's been collected on us through RECOVER, through some of the providers that do some of the, like however many patients Patterson's had. There's all this data out there on us, but it hasn't been put together. There are things that we could point to at this point in time if people were analyzing the data, what are different trajectories, what are all the subsets, what percentage of people recover. There's enough data out there to answer a lot of questions. Can it be predictive? So that's something that the people that are involved on the scientific side, I don't know what needs to be done to do those types of things. Because RECOVER still hasn't come out with their trajectory paper, but they've got all the data on trajectories, and they have somebody that's been working on it. Well, it's 2025. We shouldn't have these So one of the big problems, which I didn't see addressed during Recover TLC, is these timelines, and they were probably addressed a little bit more in the roundtable. But these research timelines, I'm sorry, they are unacceptable. Whatever we need to do to get them changed, I don't care. I kind of seen from the inside, like how it kind of is, why it all takes so long, because like you don't have one company working on this. It's like you have a bunch of different companies, and they need to, get their schedules aligned, and they need, there is so much delay kind of built into this. Your researchers, if they're associated with academic, institutions, right? They're not just a researcher, but they're also maybe a teacher, maybe they're a clinician. And oh, by the way, they everybody tends to like take the August break. The first time I heard August break, I was like, there is no August break. I'm going to be sick for every day in August. And then you get the same type of thing like around semesters, ends, and every university has a different schedule. So, you got a lot of December and January that's kind of like off of the plate. There needs to be a model of just people that are just working this problem. I'm a huge advocate for let's get, all RFK has to do is sign a declaration. He's the HHS guy. He can sign a public health emergency for long COVID. Like you said, I think there's one out there right now for, they keep re-upping the opioids one. And then there's maybe 4 out there for recent national disasters. But there are plenty of things that he can just do with a signature. And as far as, um, you know, I didn't think there was a few things that could have been conveyed like concretely from Recover TLC, like Megan was saying, the money, like what, like we're all freaking grown-ups, like, and we know how to do budgets, and we, like, dude, what is the money situation, and what is the best way to spend it? Um, as far as I can tell, like at least in the University of Arizona, where I'm in the Recover program, um, they basically pay retail. So the federal government, the NIH, pays retail to SonoraQuest, and they pay retail to, the labs where they get their MRIs, and they pay retail to Banner Hospital System. I heard somebody saying like, oh, well, how much these MRIs cost. And I'm like, you're the NIH, like you can't get better deals. Like, so there's so much, you know, these people have worked all these years, right, in a system that worked a certain way. And then COVID happened. And when everything shut down, those people that kind of got, working on like Operation Warp Speed or whatever they were working on, when everything was kind of shut down, they were able to focus on things, but now that we're kind of back to where everything's open up, a lot of these people have their priorities. Like if somebody's working on a long COVID study or trial, that's not necessarily the only thing they're doing, right? So like they might not, like their biggest project that has to be done this week is getting their focus this week, and maybe the long COVID gets a little. So the model needs to change. But like if we don't have a clue about how much money there is, or like what something should cost, like I want people to break down why, I think Peluso said during the roundtable something about 18 months for a grant to get approved. I'd have to go listen to it again.
Yeah, I
But
think
like,
that was right. 18 months.
but That's just unacceptable. And so I go, why? Why is it that way? It none of these things should be these just automatic delays that they used to do in the past, I guess, and they were used to. But like now you've got this real world like learning that they could be doing with us. And it's very frustrating to see the way that like they're doing it. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if Recover TLC, is involved, with this consortium, or it's all going to be very interesting. But like I said, huge fan of let's get that public health emergency declaration for long COVID, and because that's a simple thing, that's a signature. Thanks.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on the data side, I heard a lot of people saying, what happened to the $1.8 billion, and I was very, very frustrated. It feels like nothing has come out of it. And then John and I and some other people on our team went and looked at what data is available through Recover. And you're right, there's so much, but it's like there's still nothing coming out of it. We tried to get access to it and we had a hard time. Someone else on our team who even has an academic appointment tried and wasn't able to get it. At that point, there was only 4 outside researchers who could actually have access to the data. And so there's so much there. I agree. We need to get people looking at that. And John brought that up at the TLC meeting. I think you actually talked to some of the leads about that, didn't you, John?
Yeah, and when I talked to him, he said actually some of the data's around. So a week or two ago, we went to look for it and found it. But it's some of it is the high level um, summary data, but even that in terms of usability. So right now, you've got raw data files that then most anyone wanting to use it would have to figure out the structures and how to work it. And to the guy I talked to's credit, he said, if you have a question, you might be able to ask us to ask somebody who's got the data running. But there's a big difference between data and available information to explore. And so available information to explore might be the trajectory of people with the condition in various clusters or with underlying linkages, whether they're socioeconomic or comorbidities or treatments or what have you, where the raw data might be just thousands of fields that are used to describe certain items, but linking them all together to get that information picture and then be able to synthesize that into, somebody who gets this good treatment gets better faster, and somebody who doesn't. That becomes knowledge, and that hierarchy of data, information, knowledge that ultimately is action. Here we can do those tests, we can do those interventions, we can get that approval from the FDA. It's further up that stack that needs to be accessible to a broad set of people. I'd love to have the ask of having somebody's day job within NIH Recover be to put the data that's available onto a website that is usable by a data scientist that is interested in the project, and use that as a measure. So somebody who's not super familiar with the data can look at it and start working with it and pivot it and move it around. That would be really, then you could really crowdsource a lot of this stuff. It's hard now though.
Yeah, but like, so that's why we need to be like forward looking, and like I always say, like nobody's coming to save us. Like we need to come up with the ideas, because like, like one thing they said in the round table, not at the, but they said like, yeah, we're gonna bring doctors on board, because like we we need the doctors that have been treating patients. And I was thinking to myself, okay, who sold these guys on a bill of goods that there's a bunch of doctors out there that know how to treat long COVID
Yeah,
patients?
I
That was like that statement, like to me, was them being sold that by, practitioners that want to get in, saying like, well, the doctors have the answer. So like, we are the ones who support ourselves. We have to be the ones that like push back on like incorrect information, and then we need to be proactive, like like what you're saying, John, like is something that isn't going to happen like right now, but we can say to this new group, say like we need something like this expedited, and this is what we mean when we're like there needs to be a model, and there needs to be people that are just working this, um you know so that's for us to like start pushing right now.
Absolutely, and by pulling some of the ideas together and forums like this and others, and then those can be taken as raw material into some of the meetings that Megan and others have been talking about, or just individual advocacy meetings that are happening. But having those concrete asks are make it a whole lot easier to get action. Make it easy for the person you're trying to get to do something for you.
Agree. So anybody who's a listener who wants to come up and speak, you can go ahead and request to speak, and we'll bring you up. Playgrat, I think I saw you go off mute if you want to speak. I guess, does anyone have any questions or topics that we want to ask people about, want to discuss right now?
Hey, this is Megan. If I could put something out there briefly, and I'm hoping that Playground can come off of mute because I am just waiting with a deep breath to get to hear their thoughts. That idea that was just put out there where folks are still trying to access data, I just want to put in a plug that, elected leaders are just as frustrated right now as everyday Americans are in a lot of ways about this is not a partisan statement. This is just, the Hill is in loggerjams right now. Congress is, struggling to move even really critical legislation in the current environment. And so one of the things that I love to take into meetings, whether that's somebody on the Hill that's a friend or would consider helping us, or to the administration, is things that don't require legislation or massive actions that move the ball down the field. I'll give another example that came out of the Thursday roundtable that I think is really important to uplift, and that is, Senator Young asking Secretary Kennedy, will you do a roundtable with pharma? Will you get FDA on side to start drafting guidance, to start working internally, so that we can get clinical trials reviewed by folks who understand long COVID? HIV/AIDS had the same challenge, originally, where HIV/AIDS, materials that went into the FDA or the NIH for grants, or, the FDA for approvals, whether it was clinical trials or products or tests eventually, were reviewed by people that were not HIV/AIDS issue experts. So those things are just decisions. Like an FDA commissioner can decide that right now, today. They can send an email today. They can make an announcement to staff today. Those data issues that were shared, if anyone else is having those still, my understanding out of Thursday is actually some of those things have been shifted and rectified. But if people have concrete examples, please send them to me, and I will do my best to try to take that into anyone who will listen. And if there's anything else like that, please bring it forward, because again, we need to have a big ton of ideas. And there's things that we've been waiting for and calling for and asking for that I think we have an open door and an opportunity right now to try to ask for again and see if they yield progress. And so make them say no to us, make them decline. They might just say yes, so if anyone has anything like that, please do send it over, because there's a lot of things that are overdue that we can make progress on that don't always require the highest level of action. We should keep calling for that, but I think it's a yes and strategy, if that makes sense.
Awesome. What's the best way for people to contact you? Like, can people DM you in here?
Yeah, that's great. Or just email me. It's just my last name, which is Stone, like a rock, STONE, at longcovidcampaign.org. And I will do my best to respond if I'm not personally crashing, which is happening a lot lately, to be honest. So thanks if you can give me grace. I'm a sick person living with this too.
Definitely.
Megan, is it okay if I ask a couple here right now of you? Because I don't know if I have the memory or bandwidth to send an email later today. But just briefly, two things I know that have consistently come up. And sorry, the audio wasn't great, so I don't know if you guys discussed this first one already before I had to drop out a couple of times to get back in. But is vaccine access. Like, a lot of us prefer Novavax, and that being held up when our specialists are recommending that, particularly for people who have immunothrombosis issues or other clotting concerns, has been, a problem, especially because if we can't get Novavax and then all we can get are Moderna or Pfizer, but then those are maybe also, off the table. Obviously, getting any vaccine is better than having no vaccine, right? And then being subjected to the worst possible impacts of further COVID reinfections or infections if people haven't gotten COVID before. And so I know so many patients have mentioned this strange sensation after getting a COVID booster that their symptoms alleviate. Some of the symptoms moderately alleviating, some of them significantly alleviating for like a couple of weeks, even a month. And I know that there's been all sorts of papers and theories and discussions about that stuff, but I think maybe that would help to bring that to the forefront to kind of stress to government agencies why having these vaccine access is very important to our patient populations. And then the second thing is connective tissue disorders and diseases. There was this massive report on connective tissue disorders that went out to Medicare and Medicaid and other government health agencies back in 2023, basically trying to get people expedited for disability reviews and, disability approval, being like, hey, these are consistently like high disease burden diseases. Like, people with connective tissue disorders have dozens of other comorbidities. Like, they're pretty much always going to be extremely physically stressful. So if someone's coming to you with, a connective tissue diagnosis, you should straighten up and pay attention. And so, like you were talking about, using existing reports and tools that already exist, right, to not make more work for ourselves and having these discussions with folks. I did notice that at least one of the speakers that was at the, RECOVER TLC meeting the other day was like a clinician who has been talking a lot with a lot of Ehlers-Danlos clinicians about venous compression, about connective tissue degradation due to immune and vascular damage, caused by COVID. And, I do think that that is something that I consistently get approached by patients a lot, asking about, right? Is there any further advancement in this? So those are the two things.
Thanks, Emily. Let's see if Playgrat, are you able to speak yet? We've been waiting.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about the connection issues. I think I just wanted to speak to trial design, because even though we didn't necessarily see great progress in terms of trial design reflected in this current round of RECOVER studies, I think that there were some hopeful signs at RECOVER. So one, I think the PolyBio group has been doing great work in terms of how they're designing their trials. For example, the SPEAR study is collecting, I think, 400 different biomarkers. And I think both Iwasaki and Peluso and possibly Petrino all mentioned that it's important to make every trial a mechanistic trial, meaning doing exploratory responder subgroup analysis and correlating biomarkers with, to see who responds and trying to find predictive biomarkers from that can be both clues to pathology and can also be used in clinical decision making. So I think that that aspect is something that researchers, can do to speed up the pace of trials. And I know Iwasaki and Peluso are both doing responder analysis and have found some signals in their data of their previous monoclonal antibody trials and Paxlovid trials. And then another thing that really excited me was the fact that there was a statistician scheduled to speak at Recover who spoke about platform adaptive trials and response adaptive platform trials in particular. The fact that NIH is even thinking about that enough that they scheduled a statistician from within the NIH to speak on that is really exciting to me, because that level of sophistication is not something that I saw at last year's meeting, and it hasn't necessarily been clear to me that it's been on the minds of researchers leading up to this. So seeing that, I think, is a good sign. However, of course, these kinds of things need money, and we don't know how much money we have, and we don't necessarily have money coming down the pipeline. So that's kind of important to sort out. But I think that that's a way that you can accelerate trials and understanding of pathology, which will be key to finding cures. So that's really exciting. And I think critically, something that the statistician mentioned is that cancer, the cancer space tends to dominate these kinds of trials, although he gave examples of this being used in COVID and Ebola. The interesting thing about cancer is not only that they tend to do these trials, and he said that they dominate this type of trials because they have more mature pipelines and treatments, which long COVID, of course, doesn't quite have at all. And the interesting thing about cancer, though, is that they also have regulatory frameworks at the FDA that I think might be unique to oncology, or if not unique to oncology, they're definitely not the norm at the FDA, where they will use the existence of a responder subgroup in a trial to approve a drug if the safety profile is correct, like if the safety profile is reasonable. So that can accelerate the speed of drug approvals, and also understanding predictive biomarkers within the context of a trial can also help clinicians decide on which patients will benefit from those treatments or which patients might be at risk if they attempt to try those treatments. So that was really exciting to me, but again, like, it doesn't seem necessarily widely reflected in the current batch of trials. So I think that's something that we really need to push for. More sophisticated and complex trials to suit a potentially complex heterogeneous disease.
Completely agree. Those are all great points. I think I saw a lot of people aren't happy about the 4 interventions that were chosen, and I probably would have chosen different ones myself, but I'm like, as long as if they do the responder analysis, if they can get some mechanisms out of it, then that's a great step forward. But yeah, it's not clear how much will be done in the current trials, so I think keeping to, like, if we can keep giving input to the teams, we could really push for that. Before we move on, there's been a few people who have requested to speak, and I click yes that I am let's see approving you, and then it doesn't come up as a speaker. So I think I might be having issues because I'm trying to do this on my computer. I've read that it can work better on a phone. So if anybody has a phone and wants to try to help me to bring people up, can you raise your hand and I'll make you co-host? All right, Emily. Okay, cool. I'm going to make you co-host. While I'm doing that, I think Veronica was the next one that had come up here. Did you want to speak?
Hi there. Thanks very much. I do have some kind of concerns. I have to confess I haven't had the time to fully watch beside the clips, neither the Recover, neither the roundtable. But I've been wondering if somebody could tell me what was the feeling about Secretary Kennedy trying to blame. I mean, no, I'm not misconsidering the fact of the vaccine injury, but I've always been worried that he's going to be blaming all long COVID on vaccines, and that's, I don't know if anybody has got a taste of that. The other thing that I've always been wondering is that we are very few people around the world, to be honest. I mean, compared to the level of the problem, that we are actually involved in either advocating or researching or helping in any way in relation to long COVID and even to ME. And I think we need to get a better organization that, I've been proposing for a long, long time, because this is already, as we all know, a very complex problem that we're facing. And on top of that, every different group is kind of trying to push to the side where they believe is, that we are going to get better results. But the reality is this is helping not to be able to really make those very clear asks, as John was saying, from the few people that could probably make these big decisions. And I think one of the biggest problems is that I don't see any government really realizing the economical impact of long COVID. It's kind of the numbers are out there, but nobody has really realized not only at the moment what is happening with all these increases in disability leaves in many countries, but it's also the fact that what is going to happen in 2 or 3 years' time if we don't do anything about this, because eventually there is no going to be even carers to care for the sick people. And that's very worrisome, I think. So probably we need to push a bit more on stating that, yes, of course, this is an emergency, but as we know, governments think more of money than of people, unfortunately. So I think that's a strong point that we should include in that call for an emergency situation, because it's not only how many people are affected, but how much is that really inflicting into both kind of economical, like at personal level, but also at countries level, because that's really going to happen. And another point that I've always been concerned about, and I always try to put myself in the middle between patients and researchers, because I'm very close to many patients, but I'm also a researcher. And I think we need to, I do understand the desperation from the patients and how much everybody wants this to move forward and to have answers as soon as possible. But at the same time, research is very complicated itself. And of course, we need to find better ways to accelerate it. But I think sometimes there is a lot of friction between patients and researchers. And to be honest, even when I do understand the demands, I think that's not really helping to move forward, because sometimes is kind of verging on the attack of some researchers, which again I do understand the desperation from the patient side, but I think we really need to think on a way to work together and to move this forward in a way that is not a fight but is a complete collaboration, understanding that I think the few researchers that have been moving forward and trying to get involved in this, they're doing a huge amount of work. Probably is not the best, probably is not exactly what we want or what we need. But I think it's just supporting them that is going to help. And I'm just going to set a very quick example. On this roundtable and on the clips I've been watching, many people have been kind of, claiming that the researchers there were not masking. And of course, the ideal would be that they will be masking, but we don't know the situation. We don't know if Secretary Kennedy just forbid the fact that they will be wearing a mask. And I think this is not a helpful situation. And we know how little energy the whole community has. So I think to me, it's just a proposal to try to spend that energy on the thing that will help us to move forward, more than to be fighting with each other, because honestly, we are very few compared to those 400 million people who have been affected. And I think we have to concentrate on the positive side of this. So I would leave it like that for the moment. But if somebody could give me mostly that sense of disblaming everything on vaccines, I will appreciate that. Thanks.
I did notice during the meeting that there was one person who had suggested that they thought that that vaccine injuries were lasting longer than long COVID. They made a direct comparison. And I think everyone who was paying attention was like, what are you talking about? Because we have no evidence of that. And we have lots of evidence that long COVID numbers have remained stagnant, that it's not going away for people. I did notice that some of the questions were kind of pointed about vaccine injury, trying to make it seem like it was as big a number population-wise as long COVID. I think that, in my opinion, the people who were responding really did try to keep the questions scientifically based, tried to keep it focused on, okay, what we can accurately say, what we do scientifically know, what we have the evidence for. So even though there might be some people who are asking questions that are frankly not helpful for long COVID or vaccine injury people, there are people who have both, like me, right? And who have paid very close attention to the science. And, I do think that the people that they had in the room at least understood that those questions were not reflecting what we know scientifically so far, and they were trying to get the conversations back on track to more helpful lines of thought. But that's just my perspective on what I was listening to. Would be curious what you all thought.
I agree. I think that I've heard Secretary Kennedy, I think in his congressional approval or some testimony, talking about there was going to be some kind of a roundtable or some kind of a activity with experts, and I think he name dropped Vaughn and Patterson in that. But certainly with them there and Awasaki and Petrino and others, I don't think there's anyone in that group that would say vaccines have caused no harm or that vaccines are long COVID, but somebody with a vaccine injury can look very much like somebody with a disease of acute COVID that ends up with long COVID. But they're online. There historically was a place where it had to be all or none, and that feels to me like it's tempered some in the last year or so.
I agree with that, John. That's what I heard in the meeting too. And Dr. Redfield spoke up about his treating both VAIDS, as he calls it, and others call it, vaccine injury and COVID at the same time. I know in our large cohort here in North Carolina, a number of clinicians are treating both just because they see so much overlap. And those of us that worked in healthcare that got both got the vaccines and also got COVID, we're scratching our heads obviously as to what's what. So the complexity of all this necessitates that we all work together, and everybody's echoed that. I would love to see us work more with people overseas, and I'm hoping that some of the big studies, Norway, for instance, has indicated that they're trying to fund a countrywide economic analysis study, and I think that's a really good way to go to try to show the world that of the economic impacts that are here, because so many of us are out of work. um, and were not really productive. Um, the Again, the complexity that researchers are forced to try to um, wrap their arms around really, I think, necessitates our our bottom up support, our need to refer to people that are what I would call intermediate influencers, and that would be people like John and Megan and others who have connections. I try to do the same here in this state, where I know people at the research and clinical level who are sometimes doing both. There aren't enough bodies to do everything, but we're all concerned with trying to spend what meager monies we have in the right way so as to make the future a little brighter. A year ago, we heard some really good things, I think, from NIH. It was really the first, what I would call, attempt to bring people together from all facets of society that touched long COVID. And there was some heat at times, but nonetheless, it happened. And I was saddened to see that some of the people that were working on that weren't, and maybe they are, and I'm just not seeing it, but weren't brought into the present conversation, because it is certainly an all hands on deck situation that we have right now. So I really want to encourage all of us to refer when we can to people around us, people that we know. Just simply ask the question and see if someone can bring the idea or the monies or other things to the people that are dealing with millions and billions of dollars here.
That's such a great point about the complexity of all of this. I think a lot of us have had the experience that there's usually not one factor, but multiple factors, right? Ones we know about, ones we don't know about yet. I know when I was talking with Vaughn about a year and a half or 2 years ago, he told me that his most severe patients he saw with long COVID and vaccine injuries were people with Ehlers-Danlos and other connective tissue diseases and disorders. And so I do think that bringing in those organizations, EDS Society, Marfan's Foundation, other organizations, and rare disease funding could be extremely helpful. I have seen the same pattern exist in patient communities where a lot of folks who have had more severe cases of vaccine injury or long COVID do end up going and getting assessed by a biogeneticist or geneticist. And then lo and behold, they have Marfan's, they have Ehlers-Danlos, they have mixed connective tissue disease. And so I think that a lot of folks, because they might be only aware of one factor occurring in a specific environment or during a specific time frame, because that was the only thing that clinicians were looking for at that time, right? Or that they were aware of at that time. They go back and then they say, oh my God, I had an autoimmune disease, or I had an undiagnosed connective tissue disorder, or I had something else going on that was creating the severity of the overall disease burden. And I just thought that this was all down to this or that, right? And the more that we understand that these umbrellaed praxis, especially that folks could have multiple post-viral syndromes and post-infectious syndromes going on at the same time, things that they had lying dormant for decades even, right, that were resurged by COVID infections, that then need treatment again or might need treatment for the first time. I think building those connections, especially internationally, is going to be very important. And I'm a little concerned scientifically and politically about, if we're going to have the government support necessary to maintain those international connections. It was a lot easier in the last decade than it has been in the last couple of years, due to different political reasons. And, I'm concerned that some scientists might not want to, travel to the United States or even, teleconference with other clinicians in the United States. It was already difficult, and, that's something that I personally am hoping that improves in the next few years because we desperately need it to.
Yeah, right there with you, Emily. John spoke very well about the complexity, and I noticed this morning that MECFS Science at MECFS Skeptic on X posted this amazing, extremely complex study going into genetic factors driving MECFS, and it's really a Herculean task. Thankfully, now we have, of course, a lot of people using AI and beginning to network the hive mind, but it's a huge thing. So very grateful that this group and Recover TLC is really trying to stay on top of it, sick times, and so many others here. I think that have science at heart, and hopefully we can all move forward with a little bit of optimism.
You mentioning the sick times just reminded me that those are some links that I was going to put in the chat under the space, along with some other ones. So I'm going to remember to go and put those links in now. But does anyone else want to speak right now?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a small point about decentralization of studies. I think it would be very useful to have some type of government-approved framework for decentralized studies, which is a way that you can broaden and speed up studies, especially with diseases like this where people are not all within a 10-minute walk of some major university or something. So I guess now for the study I want to put together, I'm not sure if it's going to pass IRB approval because of the decentralized nature to the study. And the other point I wanted to make is that whenever these studies are put together, they can't be put together with the idea of testing a specific dose. There has to be some flexibility in dosing, because what people need in general in this population are low doses, and the dose is very different. So for nicotine, the dose can be from below 1 milligram for some people, and some people need above 21 milligrams to get similar benefits. So if there was a trial somewhere and they said, okay, we're going to test 7 milligrams on a bunch of people, it would fail. Okay. Lastly, I just want to say that for these bigger studies that are being put together with very complete medical trials, there's nothing stopping them or somebody else in collecting data on those treatments in other ways. So if there's something that's going to be tested like the GLP, there can be surveys put out just to get people's feedback on what they've learned so far and what benefits they're getting from GLPs in low doses and what doses are working for them, etc. So those types of surveys and collection of information, I think, could be broadened. And the best way to broaden it would be to have some type of central organization that's leading the way. Almost every disease has an organization that's kind of like the one everybody looks to for information. Whereas for MECFS and long COVID and related diseases, there's so many different organizations that are kind of all running off in different directions. which is good in some ways, but in other ways, it would be good to have one leader that's just kind of directing things a little bit and coordinating actions, especially to not waste valuable energy and time. So that's all I had to say.
Thanks, Troy. David.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'm in a dodgy Wi-Fi area.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, cool. Hey, I just popped in here a few minutes ago, and I've been listening to you all talking, and about this complete COVID disaster we're faced with. And coincidentally, about 10 minutes prior to in here, I was having a chat with somebody about an initiative I'm working on for the cancer community, and how do we get people to the source of truth. And Troy was just talking about there's nothing to stop people making research studies available to find workarounds to getting people to the sources of truth, for whatever it may be that we're interested in learning about. And, I really think an answer for this is to store the NIH data, for example, on the blockchain, get it away from the website. In my research for the cancer initiative, um, I'm a cancer patient. So in terms of my prognosis and the awareness of a clinical trial, for example, for multiple myeloma that may be discovered in Timbuktu is concerned, I'm never going to know about it, and there's no point in me finding out after I'm dead. And so, how do we get these sources of truth to people? And I think the blockchain is the solution to that, because the information is immutable there. Now, that's where I see the solution being in terms of the access to the information, which can be free and globally accessible forever. And so that's fantastic. We've got a vehicle, but how does one do it without ending up in court? Because that's the last thing I want to do. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't really have much more to offer because I'm sort of buried in something and just listening to this in the background and learning. But I was in a space earlier for long COVID patients, talking about their woes, and it's just absolutely hopeless. There's a 27-year-old guy that was talking about all of his organs gradually shutting down thanks to either COVID or the vaccine. He doesn't know how long he's got to live. There are over in the US, over 1 million people a day are getting COVID. So take all the nonsense out of it, all the hoax and deniers and blah, blah, blah. Just take all that out of it and find a way of getting the source of truth in terms of how a virus works, what it does to people if they've got a dodgy immune system, or if you've got this chromosome string, don't use that treatment. It suggested you use this, and this is what the community is saying. Back to what Troy was saying, it's the community that you go to and say, whatever whatever the horse tablets are that people have been taking or the bleach they've been drinking, you go to 100 people and you do a study on the 100 people that have decided to take this approach and another 100 people that have taken that approach. And so you have a grassroots organization coming back to a central source of truth to what has been working for people and what hasn't. And if they've got cancer or another comorbidity, this is what these groups are saying has helped them. And I think that's where the solution lies. What we do know is the government isn't going to produce the solution. Pharma is not going to produce solution because it's not in their interests. They want people to be in their control for whatever the sordid reasons may be, profit or votes or whatever. And so I really think that's how one could start looking at this issue and how we can start to connect people who do have long COVID together, so they're not all in a room talking about how miserable they're feeling. They're talking about, yeah, you know what? I've been taking turkey tail mushroom and it's really helped me. I've got my, my mind has come back and I don't have the foggy feelings anymore. And somebody else might say, yeah, I've been taking lion's mane mushroom and I don't have neuropathy anymore. Whatever it might be. And so I really think that sort of approach will get results, because you've got the people saying this is what works and this is what doesn't. You don't have government in the way, and you don't have pharma in the way, and you don't have the conspiracy theories in the way. That's really all I had to offer. I don't know if you got any of it. I was in and out of signal, but thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, we could hear that. You didn't really cut out much. So I actually have to run and get my son from school, but we still have 42 people in here, so it seems like people might still want to keep this going. Does anyone want to take over host for me and call on people?
I can stay on, and if people want to raise their
Awesome.
hands if they have questions, then I can make them speakers.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
no problem.
This is Megan Stone. I have to drop off as well because I'm here at the UN summit in New York trying to fly the flag as best I can from a wheelchair here. We are few and far between, friends. So I would just leave folks with this, like, nobody's coming in on the white horse. I know that Mike C and I often say some version of that. Like, we are the cavalry here. So let's continue working together. Let's continue finding ways to push ahead. And, if there's any way that I can ever work with anyone across the space, I try to make a practice of really listening to anyone that's living with this and wanting to work together creatively. So please reach out. And just thank you. I just want to thank Renegade Research for hosting this space and inviting me to come be with you today for just a little bit and just honor you for that. Thanks so much for all your work.
Thank you so much for all your insightful questions and comments, Megan. Really appreciate you as always. If anyone wants to step as a speaker, I can go ahead and step you up if you want to raise your hand. I do think what Veronica was saying earlier about emphasizing the money problem has been consistently a very good strategy across governments globally. As soon as people understand, how many folks are losing out on profits, losing out on workers, losing out on productivity, as soon as it hits their wallets and their GDPs, they start to care more. So it's a sad, unfortunate reality. And I think that journalists who have continued to emphasize the costs of long COVID, have seen this approach be effective as well. As soon as they bring up how many billions are lost or that could have been made, potentially, there seems to be a more attentive response. But that's just my opinion about that. And Sean's up.
Hi. I was just going to speak on bridging like efficacy and practical issues in regarding severe patients accessing trials and just general healthcare issues. I can only speak for myself in the UK, but it feels like if you are unfortunate enough to get to a severe point, you kind of just fizzle out from whatever trials there are accessible. There's very few in the UK anyway, but they certainly aren't accessible to severe patients.
Yeah, unfortunately, with some of these comorbidities, especially with some of the stuff that they're just aren't as many clinicians or labs around to do testing for, like severe microclots, like mechanical neurosurgical issues that are causing and worsening ME/CFS elements, you know, and associated conditions. There are just sometimes a few clinicians or even one clinician in a nation, right? Or even in a continent. And as someone who's had severe ME/CFS for 8 years, you know, I can attest that it takes a lot of energy, right? Just to try to figure out what an investigative pathway might be, and then who the closest clinician might be, trying to figure out the connections to that person, you know, clinically on social media, etc., reaching out, seeing if, you know, you might be able to fundraise care for that specific thing, which can be very difficult because a lot of us are dealing with kind of a tenuous house of cards situation. We have so many conditions and they're all feeding into each other. And so, you know, if we have the money, the ability, the energy to focus on treating multiple conditions at once, amazing. But there are so many patients who unfortunately do not have those things. And I think that needs to be an important part of clinician conversations, because if clinicians are frustrated as to why a treatment might not be working, it could be because other comorbidities continue to make that particular thing they're trying to treat harder than it might otherwise be. Go ahead, Veronica.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think just bringing together two ideas. The first one is that is one of the main challenges that we're facing in terms of finding the right clinicians, because first of all, clinicians are by training will really focus on one single thing, and they are more and more, I mean, throughout the years, they have become more specialized each time. So it's very hard to convince somebody to work in a multidisciplinary team. That is what really is required for patients with long COVID and ME. So that's one problem, not because they are not used to working in teams, and because they really are restricted on their level of knowledge. And if we also consider the fact that most of them are not really updated with these topics, then it's getting very, very hard. But that's the only solution that we could find. So I think that's one of the main challenges that has been the point where I, mainly in Mexico, I get round each single time. It doesn't matter how much advocacy we do, it doesn't matter how much education we try to do. At the end, if we don't have a multidisciplinary group of medical doctors who are open to understand and to learn more from other specialists, it's very hard to treat patients because we really don't have the way to send them. So that has been very hard. And I think is one of the main points, because it doesn't matter what else we tackle, unless we have that multidisciplinary team, it's very hard to do. And for what David was proposing about this studying of cohorts for whom certain therapies have worked, although I think it's a very good proposal, in a way it's very hard, and this is something I really don't have the answer for. And I don't know if Tara or John, I don't know if John is still here, I think he's gone, could help me with some ideas, because the reality is, to know what to do, we need statistically significant data. It's very hard to put forward any treatment if we have just scattered data, even if that is very good data, and even if that has worked very well for some people, is really difficult for a drug or for a treatment or for an approach to be accepted in general, and for medical doctors to accept it and to actually use it on patients if we don't have the stats behind it. At the same time, we know that for these conditions, we do need to go into kind of personalized really treatments. It has to be a one-to-one treatment. So I don't really know how we can reconcile those two concepts, which are in principle very opposite, but we need to do it. And I don't know, Tara, if you have any ideas of how we could move forward with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had some mind-blowing anything to offer, and I don't. First of all, I'm still somewhat crashed from attending the meeting. And second of all, I think, you exactly laid out the problem. We have a gold standard that we'd like to aim towards, but it takes too long and too much money, and there's too much suffering happening to wait for that. So I think, like John mentioned earlier in the meeting, things like that survey about treatments that were working. I think there's a similar one out now about treatments that were not terribly helpful, personalized medicine, gathering stories and anecdotes into a level of evidence beyond just N of one, but compiling a lot of N of ones is something that can be helpful. But likewise, even with these big trials that are being organized and, like the low dose naltrexone and the GLP-1 inhibitor trials, I'm really concerned about the doses that are being used. I think we have to, and this has been mentioned already, just to piggyback, we really have to be careful about starting at a low dose and increasing slowly. I mean, the thought of taking a very severe person and putting them on low dose naltrexone, which is, considered somewhat benign. But I started that before I developed ME/CFS, and I did not increase my dose weekly. That feels wild and crazy and irresponsible to me. Not to mention when Dr. Kaufman was setting the stage for the GLP-1s, he was talking about using 1/10 of a standard dose to start, and our RECOVER TLC trial is starting at a standard dose and then increasing from there. So yeah, I think we have to balance. We need to, work on decentralized trials and maybe not get so obsessed about placebo-controlled trials. Yeah, they're important, but that's not the only level of evidence. But also just being really careful and listening to patients about how we design studies to make sure that the information we get is accessible and useful. All the people who've been advocating, who've been doing amazing work, like long COVID families, talking about, how we can make these trials more accessible to more severe individuals, to children, to adolescents, to people without transportation, without childcare, providing meals, doing off hours. All of these things are just so tremendously important, and I think it's really requiring a paradigm shift that's honestly quite shocking to me, how hard it is for these researchers to shift in their practice. I have a PhD in public health, but I was trained in socio-behavioral health, and my whole training has been about incorporating patient perspectives, meeting people where they are, listening to people. So it's still a slap in my face and a reminder that not every researcher has that training, and really does require a lot of hand-holding and listening and mentorship to get to that place to incorporate these perspectives. So a lot of barriers and not a lot of answers. And I wish I could say something drastically different. And, I'm just kind of sorry for where we're at this moment.
So many good points you just made. Coming from the medical research side, I know that the struggle with medical research is you're trying to obtain a patient history, you're trying to understand the landscape of dosages that have been suggested in research or tried for patients in the past. Some might not be aware that microdosing LDN is a thing for ME/CFS, right? And so that might not be something that crosses their minds. Just like microdosing other prescriptions, might be helpful, but also they might not be aware of the associations. Like, LDN is not particularly helpful for a lot of patients who have a mast cell disorder that is completely not treated or not properly treated causing a tremendous amount of pain and inflammation. And patients who have structural mechanical basis issues, neurosurgical issues, um, going as a part of their MECFS, causing other conditions like adrenal issues, they might not respond well to some of these things also. And unless there's sort of, an understanding of all of these different conditions that are on the field, trying to assess suspected or known conditions, I think it's really hard to kind of have that fuller picture. At the same time, medical researchers, part of their job is to try to not overly bias the participants of the research projects. So they don't want to accidentally feed into assumptions and connotations that patients might make about a particular treatment, about a particular condition. Because then the research will be flawed to the point where it might not even be usable. So it's a very difficult line to walk. And I just think that you've raised so many good points, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Emily.
Go ahead, David.
Hey there. I need to stop wandering around the room. I keep getting disconnected. Tara, Veronica, and I couldn't catch who was last speaking. Um, these the logistical issue here is what I'm hearing is how do we get this information to the people that need it, whatever the information may be. I've spent the last couple of years trying to work out how to do that for the cancer community, and I've worked it out pretty much. And if anybody's interested in chatting some more about the concepts that I'm pulling together, I'd love the opportunity, because I think the more heads we can put together on the logistics side of things, because you're the scientist, right? You've got the info, and you know what needs to be done, is how do we connect all of this information and validate it, and present it to the people in an easy way to understand, and to enable them to connect with the clinicians that they need to, whether it's an urgent case or not. And if it's an urgent case, this is what happens, right? And so I'd love the opportunity to talk about it. I'm very excited about my cancer initiative. I've just got the South Alberta Institute of Technology are using it as a case study for their final year marketing students, and they're putting together some proposals on how one goes to market, both with the app I'm developing and the tokenized economy that will support patients and caregivers and the growth of the information accessibility. The primary objective in terms of users for the first year is to have 1 million users by the end of next year. We've got to work out how to do that, but that's what they're good at. You guys are good at the information. I think I've got to a point where it appears I'm good at putting together a front end and some back end workarounds with APIs to get the information that we need and to validate it. It's important that it's validated. And obviously, it needs to be vetted and structured properly by people who know what they're talking about. And keep the pharmaceutical industry and government out of the equation completely, and go to them in a different way, by saying, listen, this is what we're doing. It might be of use to you. So rather than battling them, we're using the information that's available from these people, including interactions with drugs, for example. And we're saying this is what the 1 million users next year are saying about dexamethasone, right, for my condition, or, or anything. This is what 1 million people are saying about Tylenol. That seems to be the flavour this week. This is what people are saying about the polio vaccine. Blah, blah, blah. It's doable. It really is. And the concept is so straightforward. It's just remarkably obvious that one has to do this. And it's really a case of getting the right people together, as you've also been talking about, to make it happen in a legitimate way and to avoid any liability. And so I just, for example, I just a couple of days ago managed to get the NIH APIs for all cancer types and pediatric cancer types, a plain English version and a healthcare practitioner version up into my app. It drove me nuts trying to get it to work, but I managed to get it to work. And so I'm connecting people with the NIH's source of truth. Uh, um, there are plenty of citations there if people want to dig deeper. But, one should also forget the NIH for the moment and also think about what the NHS in the UK is saying and what the Long COVID Association, for example, is saying, and what the Vaccine Association is saying. These are the sources of truth. This is the science. This is all the information. And that way the population can make a considered decision whether or not to be vaccinated, whether or not to be screened, whether or not to wear a mask, and if so, which mask works and which one doesn't. And so I feel I have a responsibility to do this for the cancer community. And as I've been building this concept and the tokenized ecosystem, which is very important too, I realized that I can apply this to autism and Alzheimer's almost straight out of the gate. And so if we create a one-stop shop solution that does this, then we can all get on with our work and stop arguing about it all, because it becomes a lot more straightforward, and we won't have for people, and it won't take. Sorry, and we'll stop getting 1 million people a day being infected by COVID. That's just unacceptable. Now, we're not all going to walk around with spacesuits, right? But there's science that says a spacesuit will work and a cloth mask will not. And so, if you're spray painting a car, this mask works. If you're removing asbestos, this mask works. If you're in a COVID environment, this mask works. End of discussion. It's a straightforward, that's the science. And if we can bring the science instead of the conspiracies to the people in a way that's inviting and informative and offers some mental health solutions, which are key, whether you've got a disease or not at the moment, mental health is an issue. And if you can provide that environment, I think, and it's a grassroots driven ecosystem. And your group, for example, is part of that grassroots ecosystem. Then I believe adoption rates would be quite significant. Now, for example, if 40% of the population in the US is going to get cancer, and what I believe technology can do is reduce those rates just by increasing awareness, for example, and screening information, self-diagnosis based on what the NIH is saying, for example, and this is who you need to go and speak to if you think you've got a problem. So we can connect the dots that we believe need to be connected with technology and with a bit of AI thrown in. Really, the only role AI I see playing is offering, conversational funnel for people who want to chat about having just been diagnosed with breast cancer or prostate cancer. First thing they do as they drive home is they're not thinking about anything other than WTF, right? Now, if you're a clinician, you understand what it means. But if you're not, all sorts of things go through your mind, and they need to be able to press a button that connects them with the people, the community, and the information. So they can go and have a shot of whiskey or whatever it is and feel that they're not alone and that they're connected with people that can help. And that if a a clinical trial somewhere, wherever it may be in the world, pops up as showing promise for them, they need to know about it immediately, not after they're dead. And so technology can help us with that. And that's where AI comes into play. There has to be some human intervention somewhere, right? Even with the basic translations, right? If you get a word wrong, it could be fatal for somebody. So we can never remove human intervention, I believe, from AI processes. But AI brings us the potential to solve these logistical issues that you've been talking about and improve patient outcomes. One of the areas that, and I'll stop in shortly, one of the areas I've spent a lot of time on is tracking calendars. Now, typically in the United States, a cancer patient will get to see an oncologist once every 6 to 8 weeks. And you get 15 minutes. And the oncologist says, how are you feeling? It's the first question, right? Well, we have events every single day. So for however many, it's 240 days. There's 240 days with multiple events. You know, in my case, with multiple myeloma, whether it's bone pain or neuropathy or diarrhea or, no appetite. It can be a whole series of things that happens to me. Bone pain, I've had bone pain for 3 days. I need to be able to report that. And the tracking calendars allow me to report these events. I've recently come off Velcade and reducing gabapentin, for example. I need to be able to track what's going on. There's no point me in 6 weeks' time trying to remember what happened when I titrated gabapentin. Now, I can track that. Not only can I track that, I can produce a PDF. No one gives you an email address. No one wants to do any follow-up, right? I can walk into the practitioner's office with a printout of the PDF from my tracking calendar, and he or she says, how you been? And I'll just say, look, read that, and then you tell me. Go a step further, and you integrate, for cancer, for example, with Mayo Clinic, for example, who are quite progressive in developing new technology. If one goes to Mayo and says, well, okay, can we incorporate these tracking calendars into a trial group of 500 patients so that it's reporting live data every day. And you can flag for blood pressure or diarrhea, or if you've prescribed something new, you can track it, the symptoms, blah, blah, blah. And so the practitioner goes into their office in the morning and they get a report for their patients with the flagged items. You don't want to read pages of stuff, right? They need to be alerted when something happens. And particularly when there's a new prescription for something, whatever it may be, you need to know certainly on a daily basis, but if the patient is tracking it with each event, you will get detailed information on how the patient has responded to this drug. Now, it's doable, and I'm doing it now. That's my objective, okay? It's going to take me 2-3 more months, and it'll be finished, hopefully. And so that's going to be the model for cancer, and then I'll adapt it for Alzheimer's and this dreadful situation with autism. Then we've got COVID, long COVID, and the effect that both have on cancer patients. And I'm looking at that now, and that's why I'm listening into this space today, is to find out what's going on. And so I think there's an opportunity for us all to get together and talk about, put together a wish list. If only this happened, blah, blah, blah. And let's just chat for an hour or so about the workarounds, or maybe not even the workarounds, the simple way of getting that information. Because what we've got to do is get all of this information from qualified people to users, right? Or to the larger population. So that's all very
Yeah,
doable.
thank you, David. wanted to really quickly bring up a couple of the wearables that patients with long COVID conditions have found helpful. Like one that I have that a lot of folks know about are like the Visible app. So I know that in the Visible app, you can directly connect to specific long COVID and MECFS and other research projects associated with whatever your comorbidities might be. So that way your biodata is being directly shared with those research teams in real time, which is a little bit easier than the My Data Helps app, where you have to do everything manually. That's also a great place to find current medical research projects that you can track your infections, track your reinfections, track your symptoms, track new medications and treatments. Lumia is a tracker for dysautonomia patients for blood-brain flow that people have found helpful. I also have that. And it's really great, but it doesn't directly integrate with research projects yet, I don't think. And then, of course, there are other like biodata research trackers that people have found helpful. I do think kind of the question for a lot of those things when it comes to, governments is privacy. A lot of people want to be able to track their symptoms privately, want to be able to provide it to clinicians and researchers. They might not want the government to have a whole host of information about their conditions or about their daily biometrics, And I think that kind of will be an ongoing concern for patient communities, especially the most vulnerable among us who don't have a lot of money, who don't have a lot of wellness, to try to protect our privacy, especially in a time when privacy laws structurally are not digitally integrated, are not up to date with online and social media platforms as they should be. So I know that that's a concern patients have shared and probably will share going forward. Search, I know you had your hand up earlier. Do you still want to talk?
Yeah,
I'll let you now.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, sorry, I just every time I was connecting it, muted everything, so I had to reconnect a few times. So I was gonna touch on something that was brought up before about GLP-1s. I've taken a couple different ones now. I think I've tried semaglutide, tried tirzepatide, I've tried retatrutide, which is not released yet, but is pretty easy to get your hands on. And all of these things at even very low doses, I don't think I ever went above 2 milligrams with tirzepatide, for example. It's a pretty immediate onset of gastroparesis type symptoms. So one question I have is like, this isn't for anyone in here, but just a general question, is within trials, how would you even possibly do a placebo when the expected outcome is gastroparesis? I'm not sure how you get a placebo that gives you constipation without causing harm to the patient. So a placebo-controlled trial for that might just not work, given that I think it's what 98% of EDS patients have GI disorders. Um, it like we really do need an extremely slowly titrated trial on that. Like just like Dr. Kaufman was saying, you need extremely low doses to avoid the possible permanent consequences. For me, it wasn't permanent. For me, I found that cystanch was the main thing that helped prevent the gastroparesis. But then you have to question, how does that get included into a trial? And cystanch works by it's a ghrelin agonist, which is in essence, in simplest terms, like the opposite of GLP-1. Um, but like, how do you include something like that, which would modify the treatment slightly, um, and just making sure that you're not harming patients in the process of trying to figure out answers to this, because that is a very real possibility, and could create a whole host of consequences if you end up getting gastroparesis, Then you have malabsorption issues. We just saw a study recently about it creating an environment prime for SIBO to show up and so on. And then the other thing I was going to say is, on this whole sort of like blockchain thing and so on, like we kind of already are the source of information. Like the patient community already exists as the source of information, or the source of truth, as they were saying. Um, Going to, like the main thing that patients are having issues with is most patients are very poor and don't have access to treatments, and having more information doesn't really do much. I'm not saying that we should not be getting more information, of course, but I know a countless amount of patients that have, hundreds and hundreds of research studies saved, and it doesn't do anything. It does nothing to them. All it does is maybe cause even more suffering because all they see is that, wow, look at all these things I can't access. Meanwhile, they're worried about getting basics like food or having housing or so on. Um, so the information limit isn't really the big issue. There's plenty of information out there, and all of us have a really easy way to access it. We go on Twitter and see all of our friends talk about it. The issue is that we do indeed need things to be going through trials so that they can get insurance approval and so on, so that we can force the government to pay for our treatments. Because that's
Mate, if I may interrupt for a moment, Miss Search, because you're dead right. What's the point in giving people, dangling the carrot, so to speak? Well, the first thing there's two issues you're speaking about, and they are unfortunately interrelated. So let's assume you create a source of truth, because not everybody uses Twitter or social media. Most people, engagement rates are dropping off. People are sick of all the news. So let's move ourselves from social media as being the funnel and move that across into an app, okay? And create an app that is, qualified by the people, you folks, for example, when it comes to COVID and perhaps other things. Let's use the tokenized economy to fix other issue. Let's use the tokenized economy to fix the other issue, which is giving people access to the funds to get the medicine, whatever it may be. And so um, they're two separate issues, but they both affect patient outcome, right? If they've got money, there's a chance. If they don't have money, there's no chance, or not much. And so that's the other issue, that we can look at a solution that is outside of government. Now, if you take something like, if anybody's heard of the word meme coin, a lot of it is a load of nonsense. There's something called a fart coin that has a market cap of nearly $1 billion. Well, that's it's laughable, but it's the truth. And so, how does one then say, well, okay, let's have a cancer coin? What is the potential market value of that? Well, if a fart coin is nearly $1 billion, but there's obviously, what's called degens and crypto bros driving that up. If you remove that out of the equation and say, well, how many people would be interested in contributing $1 to the COVID token, for example? So let's say you have a market cap after a year of $500 million or $300 million, right? Then you've got some working capital to assign towards either research or medical solutions for patients who can't afford it. So it's doable, right? We've just got to work out all of the layers involved to make it happen, and where we may need to find workarounds to avoid government. And that way we have a fully decentralized, community-based informational and financial system that can go towards fixing some of these problems. Now, there's enough people around that are going to get cancer, that are going to get Alzheimer's, that have got autism, that have got COVID, that have got long COVID. There's plenty, there's no shortage of customers, for want of a better expression. And so as long as the solution, and just sort of me search, I'm directing it to that question about accessibility to the medicine, right? Or the provider. As long as the solution's objective has that key as part of its structure, then we can start to address it. Thank you.
And I do want to remind folks that, like, Renegade Research, the clinic side of it, does have discounted, like, patient financial aid. I do know that some of the clinicians in long COVID and MECF spaces have offered financial aid or do currently offer financial aid. I'm sure some people know about this information, but other people might not. So it's just something that I'm offering again. So it's not just the medical systems, you know, the hospitals, the clinics, financial aid, but sometimes the doctors themselves will forgive a bill or they will directly apply financial aid. You know, if patients make their clinicians aware that they're in a financially difficult circumstance. And I think this is so important because a lot of patients, particularly severe and very severe patients, they're already dealing with so much structural inaccessibility, physical inaccessibility, where the financial stuff is just so far too daunting for them that they don't want to try to establish with a clinician, you know, even reach out. They say there's no way that I could possibly afford that. And then after, you know, they're like, wait, this neurosurgeon is known to sometimes forgive bills of very severe patients who are unable to work. Oh, and that's enough to give them hope to reach out. And then it turns out the same situation might, you know, be available to them. So I definitely think the direct contact with clinicians is a big part of this. Like clinically, I have noted, you know, just like you brought up so many good points, Search, about how patients have so much information. Sometimes we have an overabundance of information, right? And the issue is that the clinicians or the government sources are the ones who are not up to date with information or not aware of the information they sometimes already have at their disposal. And something that I have routinely found helps is finding one clinician, right, or even a few clinicians who would be on side about receiving resources from me and then going to disperse those resources to other clinicians or to government folks. Because unfortunately, so many people in structural systems are still much more likely to receive information if it's not coming from patients, if it's coming from clinicians or researchers directly. And a clinician or researcher might not have time to read, you know, an entire paper, might have not time to review a ton of resources, you know, especially if it's not during paid hours, right? But if, you know, basically there are these relationships with people who have been clinicians in the past or been medical researchers in the past, or organizations like, you know, Renegade Research, where we can be these buy-throughs essentially, then we can get the information more directly elevated. So even just as a patient, you know, for example, if I'm having a local specialist have a real tough time understanding a specific relationship between a few conditions, you know, or like a medication and condition or something, I will, you know, ask if I have a national expert, right, who actually understands these things a lot better, who is of that same specialty. I will be like, can you have a phone call with this person to basically give them the rundown, because I don't need you to make them an expert. I just need them to hear it from somebody who already is an expert, who isn't me. And even though it's the exact same information, right, that I would share with them having a 10 or 20 minute phone call with a Mount Sinai clinician who's an expert in something, right, that they don't know as much about, suddenly makes them a lot more open, right, to discussion and to action. But, you know, I do absolutely think that there's this ongoing struggle of patients, being encouraged to lean into patient advocacy, which is very helpful. But patient advocacy isn't like a magic, glove. It's not something that like we can pull on and then suddenly everything becomes better, right? As patients, we can do everything we can to stay up to date with everything as much as possible, and it's still not going to move our care unless we're able to get some clinicians on side who are able to, move in these spaces in a more effective way. And I'm so sorry, the first point that you brought up again, Emmy Surge, if you just want to go over that again briefly for people, because I know I had a thought about that too, but it fell out of the back of my head.
Yeah, of course.
But before that, I just wanted to tell people, I guess some people have been falling out of this space, and like you had said before, the connection has not been consistent. So, I dropped out of the space I mentioned earlier twice too, and I had to come back in here. So if you've fallen out, like nobody's getting kicked out. There just seems to be not a great connection. So please keep rejoining. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that so I've taken a variety of GLP-1 agonist or dual agonist or triple agonist, and one of the major risks is gastroparesis. And gastroparesis for our patient population is a genuine, real, huge risk.
That's right.
And yeah, it's something that needs to be looked out for. I do highly suggest, like if someone is going to try it, to keep Cistanche on hand. Cistanche seemed to have cleared up. Granted, I don't know if this would work with everyone, but the mechanism makes sense. Cistanche basically speeds up your gastrointestinal tract. It will increase appetite, so it will, if you're using it for any semblance of weight loss type things, it probably will cancel that out a little bit. But it's good to have on hand just in case it happens, because the half-life of the medicine is so long that, if you stop it, you probably want to have something that speeds up things while you wait for it to work out of your system.
Yeah, I have noted that research papers recently about GLP-1s have noticed this slow gastric motility impact, right? Whether they already have gastroparesis and it makes it worse, or whether they just have temporary slowed motility. Um, it's it's interesting. A lot of dysautonomia patients also have rapid emptying disorder, which is actually what I have, the opposite of gastroparesis. But because we have mast cell disorders, a lot of us, even most of us, I would garner, um, basically that can also slow our motility, especially if our mast cell disorders are not treated or are improperly treated. So I've been kind of personally curious about, when it comes to the screening questions and considerations for this gastroparesis slowed motility side effect. Basically, if patients who are in our spaces are being screened for / treated for mast cell disorders. Originally clinicians thought that I had gastroparesis because that's how profound my MCAS's impact was on my motility. And, it still can be slowed, especially if I'm being exposed to multiple triggers at once, some of which are, food triggers, but also the whole process of digestion, the heat, the muscle activity, the friction involved, all of that releases histamine. So if you have histamine intolerance as part of your mast cell disorder, guess what? Just the process of eating and digesting starts to kick off reactions. So I do think that it would be interesting to see different clinical trials with different mast cell medications or clusters of different mast cell medications, and to kind of compare and contrast differences, right? But I know that some of these clinicians might, not be aware of all of the ins and outs of different mast cell disorders, different medications. I mean, even some of the different medications for dysautonomias impact gastric motility. So depending on which ones patients are on or aren't on, they might see differences there as well. So, yeah, I'm like some patients who have very severe gastric rapid emptying, right? to the point where they're malabsorbing things, are not able to pick up any nutrition from things that they're eating or medications or supplements they're taking, which was my situation some 6 years ago. I do think that they might even welcome a side effect of slowed gastric motility, right? Because it's a side effect that could be even beneficial in a way. And I think that's sometimes also the struggle that we're facing as patients and clinicians as well, is to try to figure out the right groupings of medications for patients, not just the things the medications are supposed to be doing, but sometimes the side effects can be beneficial, even if they might otherwise be side effects that people might not see as welcome, right? It all depends on the different patient. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm very interested to see how
I
that goes.
actually probably am on the fast emptying side, so that's actually part of the reason why I brought this up, is that even at very low doses, and this is why I was saying the titration is so very important, is that even at these very low doses, it switched me from being fast emptying to gastroparesis type of GI tract. And this was at like maybe 1 milligram. This did not happen with retatrutide, but I don't imagine there's going to be trials with retatrutide, as that's still a research chemical in essence. Um, so it's just something to be wary of, that like you probably have to go really slow with dosing, because that switch can flip not even just from normal state to gastroparesis, but from fast emptying to gastroparesis, over the course of 3 days.
Yeah, I'm also very curious about, blood volume and blood flow impacts about this, because it's something most of us have either through dysautonomias or through microclotting or clotting issues, or venous compression syndromes or mechanical spinal structural issues, also causing venous congestion syndromes. So,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, I'm sure that the output picture, right, would look different for people. Like if you're just doing oral electrolyte hydration therapy versus if you're also doing intravenous, sodium chloride IV therapy, and how frequently that's occurring. And also, the compression aspect of it all, because some people can do high grade compression, some people can't. Um, like for me, I know that my blood flow issues much improved after taking my severe microclots down to a safer level. And also getting some neurosurgeries improved, some blood flow issues as well. So, for a lot of us, it's such a comprehensive picture, right? And it takes a long time for patients and clinicians to even realize how comprehensive the full picture is. And I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I'm sure this is something that a lot of us have to be thinking about, even if we don't know. Oh, I know I have these diagnoses for certain, and I know that they are also part of this picture and these impacts.
Yeah,
I think it's something that hopefully more and more people will at least be thinking about, right? Even if we're not able to confirm yes or no yet everything that's on the
I could
table.
add one more thing too. It will also like if you have intracranial pressure disorders as well. GLP-1s, more so GIP, I think, affects that as well. So if you're on the low end, it's something to be wary about. It can lower intracranial pressure. So if you're already in the possible CSF leak category, or for some other reason have low intracranial pressure, it's something to keep in mind. I do think that it did help my intracranial pressure stuff a little bit. That wasn't as sensitive of a change, but it definitely happened, and just something to keep in mind.
Fascinating. So do you have low and high, or vertical, horizontal? What does your profile look like? Because I know this is a very important conversation to a lot of us on Renegade Research Spaces.
Yeah.
A lot of patients have these issues.
So I have Chiari and CCI and tethered cord, so it kind of goes up and down sort of based on how my cervical spine is sitting. Um, it's generally speaking pretty stable right now, but there is sometimes like I probably lean towards the higher end rather than the lower end. I don't think I have any CFS leaks. Um, from what I know, I haven't had like a cine MRI. Well, speaking of cine MRI, is there any shot you could share which neurosurgeon you were mentioning before that does compassionate care?
Yeah, so I am established at the EDS Chiari Center at Mount Sinai, South Nassau, with Paolo Bolognese and his team. So Bolognese is the neurosurgeon, but he has a team of specialists who are basically assessing for different conditions associated and caused by uh, neurosurgical mechanical structural issues causing venous congestion. So I have Chiari-like symptoms. My intracranial hypertension symptoms are severe, both horizontal and vertical. So laying down makes it worse sometimes, depending on what part of the cycle it's in. And I do have high and low flow issues. So I do know that his clinic has a rule where anyone who's on GLDP-1s to try to lose weight, because a lot of us have limited exercise, issues because we have multiple neurosurgical problems that make mobility pretty difficult. That people can be on GLP-1s, but they have to get off of them prior to neurosurgeries, which is kind of the standard role with a lot of medications and supplements for care with neurosurgery clinics, not even just this particular one. Um, but yeah, I am wondering that if there, is a particular case where, like you were saying, it could make some symptoms of Chiari or intracranial hypertension less severe, right? Just as a side effect. That could be interesting. But my clinicians are currently considering GLP-1s for me. But again, like authorizations,
If
always the problem. So, yeah.
this maybe is not the space to talk about it, if you'd like to message me, I could help you find another source for that if that doesn't work out.
Yeah, I would say we have Renegade Research has a speakers coming up next month with Ruhoy Kaufman and Dempsey doctors, and they're going to be talking about this. So anyone here who hasn't already registered would encourage y'all to register, because it's specifically about GLP-1s and their relationship with mast cell disorders. And I imagine that these other things are going to come up in conversation because they're frequent comorbidities. But yeah, we should definitely have these conversations next month, because that'll be a better space for that. But yeah, I definitely will reach out and discuss this further, because this is something that a lot of clinicians have mentioned, not just in neurosurgical spaces, but connective tissue disorder and disease patients, are having a lot of benefits on GLDP-1s, particularly, I think, because of the relationship with mast cell disorders. So.
Okay. I appreciate all the info. I'm gonna be seeing Dr. B later this year, so this is information I've all just been coming across recently as well about GLP-1s and how I have to not be on them, but they also want my weight to be down. And I guess I can mention one other thing because it's a common comorbidity. In
Yeah, and also if you have the spoons, please post the research that we're discussing. That goes for everybody in
Sure.
here, in the comments, because I know everybody loves to go look at research papers later on.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
will post. There's a really good article called "The GIP Hypothesis" by Rochelle Spolvita. I forget her last name. I will post that. I was just gonna add that a lot of us with tethered cord also have um lipomas, and lipoma likely is as a result of metabolic disorder. and GLP-1s likely help that as well. That was actually the main reason that I started them in the first place, was to see if GLP-1s could potentially improve my tethered cord by improving the lipoma buildup. I don't know if that happened because I never had an updated MRI, but maybe I'll find out later this year when I see them and they give me a whole bunch of scans again. Um, but that's something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, hopefully Rochelle can, come to the next month's speaker, and we can ask some pointed questions about that, because I know she's just a wealth of information. So, does anyone else want to come up as speaker, bring up any questions or subjects of interest, or?
I was just gonna have one more thing, super small, and then I have to go. Um, the the thing I was sort of trying to get at before was that the we've as a community tried to move over to different areas of speaking and so on in the past. When Blue Sky was launched, a certain section of our community tried to get a lot of people over there, and some people ended up going over there, but honestly, in some ways, it just fractured our community. Um, Not that I'm, blaming anyone for that, but generally speaking, the Silicon Valley way of we'll just make an app for it doesn't work. It just kind of fractures things. Anyhow, I'm gonna head out now. Thanks.
Yeah, I know accessibility issues are, a thing as well. Like, some people can do these spaces, some people can't do them because they're just too time consuming, too long. They have auditory issues. Like, I have auditory sensory issues, and so some days I just can't do these at all, even just to listen. Um, I do know that some spaces, like Mastodon, also have been particularly more accessible for people, so I do think it's important that people find community wherever they can find it, however they can find it. And I think part of the problem is that there are not necessarily the same kind of research or medical communities, right? Access to the same information as far as discussions between researchers and clinicians go, that exist on these other platforms. Like, Med Twitter was such a big force for so long that a lot of people benefited from. And I think people have tried to replicate that on Mastodon and Blue Sky, but it's not as strong. It's not, as centralized. I mean, the whole point of Mastodon, at least, is decentralization. So that doesn't mean that you can't find close community and hold close community and, find the discussions you're looking for. It just makes things a little bit more difficult. So, in some way, it just actually kind of shows to me the strength of patients, that patients are still looking for, the information, are still looking for the connection, looking to support each other, despite how many added barriers social media situations have added in the last half a decade, right? That didn't used to exist before. And so, I don't know. I am hoping that when it comes to more government folks, right? More people who are running clinical trials, that they try to do a better job of reaching out to existing communities, because some clinicians and some folks doing clinical trials are great at this. They're great at doing it in a respectful, accessible, community-oriented way, patient needs way. And then there are other clinicians and researchers who, you know, see social media as kind of a one-sided effort, right? A place where they just post and they don't really listen, and maybe they feel like they don't have the time to. It is time consuming to have broader conversations, especially since these are larger conversations, right? Even just discussing one condition at a time involves dozens of different treatments, right? And different comorbidity impacts and all of these layers. So, hopefully in the future, there will be more of a two-sided street to that. But
I just added a bunch of research to the comments of the space. There's the GIP hypothesis, a study on trizapatide in patients with idiopathic intracranial hypertension, and then there is a research paper sort of doing an overview on epidural lipomatosis, which can be sort of applied to lipoma formation in the spine, being a metabolic syndrome of the spine. But anyhow, I'm gonna head out now. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll definitely repost those next month
Okay, take care.
so more people can see it. Have
Bye.
a good one. Anyone else want to discuss anything? I'm around. I'm running an IV, so I'm here and able to be here, at least until I have to do laundry. I did feel a little bit more hope after RECOVER about fall vaccine accessibility. Like I do feel like we're going to hopefully be able to see Novavax come back in October, which seems to be the projected timeline. And, you know, that access to Moderna and Pfizer vaccines for people who need or prefer those will still be available. So, at least for now, I feel like, you know, that is something that coming out of the meeting, there was more hope about that things went better than people would have anticipated, you know. But yeah, I am very interested in what some of the people in the meeting discussed, some of the researchers and clinicians, you know, folks like Petrino, folks like Vaughn, like people who have been making patient relationships, making clinician to clinician researcher relationships, you know, not just having these conversations only in direct care, but like spending a lot of time having question and answer sessions, like meeting with people in person or via video to get into the weeds about these things and to like think more deeply about theoretical issues before like starting a new clinical trial or trying to repeat a clinical trial. And so I kind of do have more hope that like, you know, they will be bringing in even more people that we know who are researchers and clinicians in these spaces who do know a lot, who have been like on top of RECOVER, pointing out things that RECOVER did okay, pointing out things that RECOVER did not do very well, and you know, the government could fund better in the future. You know, I think that we all would have liked to see more people show up who were knowledgeable about these things, but sometimes when it comes to these hearings, there's not enough time, like in order to discuss things very well. You only have a few people to talk about it, right? So I don't know. The intention I think they expressed was to have more frequent meetings about these things. Like they have a meeting about Lyme next month, and the sentiment that they expressed was kind of an understanding that so many of the same patterns have repeated in long COVID, that have repeated in like long Epstein-Barr virus and like, you know, other long viruses and other long post-infectious syndromes, immune event, you know, syndromes, that essentially the NIH needs to do a better job of comprehensively comparing these things and like funding all of these things collectively. And so I do think that that's what a lot of patients in our spaces have been talking about for a really long time, understanding that, you know, the tide is lifting all of these boats. And the more that we tie our boats together, the more that we can save money and not do the same work over and over again, potentially, but also that we can have a better comparison and understanding the slight differences in between certain things and why one medication might work really well for one patient who has long Epstein-Barr virus, but if another patient has long Epstein-Barr virus and some other long, you know, syndrome, there might be another medication or another dosage of that medication, you know, a different treatment regimen that might be more appropriate for them. So I don't know, I did think it was kind of interesting that like RFK for the first time, I think, mentioned that he has multiple family members with long COVID. I feel like, you know, there were specific people on the government side who expressed that they understood the turmoil and the suffering that patients had experienced, that, you know, they've been making time for patients coming up to them, whether it's people they know or don't know, to understand the amount of suffering that people are enduring. So, you know, as far as a humanizing perspective and an urgency perspective, you know, the amount of meetings that they're intending to have for this, I feel like that at least is a good sign. But as we all know, like a million meetings don't necessarily translate into progress. So I think we're just going to have to see how it goes, is my view. But I'm, you know, curious to see what you guys think as well. And if you want to switch to a speaker, just raise your hand or request it. Go ahead, David.
Hey, Emily. Thank you. I need to leave the space and go to a meeting, but so I wanted to thank you for hosting this. I really learnt a lot, and for an opportunity to present what I think might be a solution to some of these issues. Ultimately, what I did want to make clear is that this is not a Silicon Valley fix. This is a grassroots, community-based ecosystem that is decentralized away from government. And so that's, to me, is what makes the blockchain interesting for these types of problems. And that way you have a community actually building it and telling you what it needs. So yeah, I'm very excited to hear how maybe technology can help based on some of the things I've heard. And thank you very much. I appreciate it again.
Yeah, thank you for your comments and for speaking today. It was really good to hear some of the ideas you suggested. I know for me, I just got Visible, I think, a couple weeks ago, and I really like the ease of just having a wearable that's just sending data straight to research projects that benefit patient communities. Um, the hope would be that like some of the other wearables for our patient communities are able to do that. Um, you know, like I said before, I'm a little bit iffy about, you know, I know that like the government, HHS really wants to pivot into wearables across the United States for a lot of people, you know, not even people who necessarily have chronic illnesses and disabilities. So, I don't know. I do think that there is a certain benefit to having these companies, you know, stay private with our data and not having data insecurity happening. I don't know. Data security is important to me, guys. So that's just my feeling. But yeah, I'm just, if anyone wants to, I know that during this particular meeting, I'm not sure they had as big of an emphasis on discussing this as they had in the past. But I'm sure it will come up. Tess, do you want to be a speaker, co-host person? think that the space is bugging out a little bit, so apologies for that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just actually wanted to bring up another point, which is that just thinking about kind of like the limitations that were brought up in at Recover by a lot of the advocates who were there and also a lot of the scientists. And these limitations were also echoed at the HHS roundtable and even at Keystone before that, which is that there's a lot of overlapping and co-occurring conditions such as Lyme with COVID or other herpes viruses that may have an impact on immunity and therefore might have an impact on immunotherapies or antimicrobial therapies that are being trialed, or might have an impact on like mitochondrial function and therefore might impact treatment efficacy. And how do you, this is something I've actually been concerned about for a while, is how do you like separate those in a trial and determine whether how do you determine treatment efficacy when you have all these co-occurring factors in a very heterogeneous population? So you might have the separate diseases that are
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit. I think she fell out. I feel like this has kept happening during this space. I'm sorry, I don't know why it's happening. Oh, there we go. Hi, you're back. Hey there. I'm not sure why this space keeps dropping people out.
can you
Yeah, we can sort of hear you a little bit.
I'm gonna try again. So there's a lot of like co-occurring conditions that can be kind of separate from long COVID but co-occurring and maybe triggered by it. And then there can also be different things that long COVID causes, like perhaps it can cause viral persistence, perhaps it can cause autoimmunity, perhaps it can cause other pathologies that we don't fully understand. And how do you separate all those, and how do you get efficacious treatments? How do you maximize the opportunity for your treatments to have a positive effect in trials when you have all of these factors? So one of the things that was brought up is like you need to understand the pathology better, so that you can understand the drug targets better. You can have a better sense of like predictive biomarkers, and that you might also be able to get predictive biomarkers without fully understanding the pathology yet, just by like testing a bunch of hypotheses like in a trial, for example, in a smaller trial, and then picking the biomarkers that work and moving to a larger trial. But when it comes to things like Lyme or whatever, how do you like do that whenever you don't have good diagnostic tests like Lyme, or the pathology is not well understood?
Right. I think it's a lot harder when, there are so many different chronic conditions and disabilities that have diagnostic tests, but they're not like foolproof, right? Like, we can do the test, go by clinical symptoms, go by other diagnostic tests as best as possible, and make an educated guess, as educated as we can be. But there are just some tests, like autoimmune disease world is full of stuff like that, right? Where like it doesn't mean that one doesn't have an autoimmune disease. It just means that unfortunately, like this is the best diagnostics that we have for it at this time. And we've seen a lot of patients, clinicians, and researchers talk about the surge in autoimmune diseases in long COVID spaces, and the surge in autoimmune diseases following other viruses and infections as well. And so this is an ongoing problem, I think, that a lot of us have. I mean, I just found out that I had an autoimmune disease for like 5 or 6 years that was misdiagnosed as something else that it was not. And, it was clinically diagnosed, because I'm not sure that the diagnostics would have really helped in that particular situation, and the way that the diagnosis was basically confirmed is that the treatments are working, which is the good news for it, right? But like, this is the situation I feel like a lot of us are in. There are some things genetically, if there are specific tests for it, even just some tests, like when it comes to mitochondrial diseases and dysfunctions, we can confirm some of that. But, my particular type of mitochondrial dysfunction is in dark genetics still, which means it's mostly undiscovered. And I still think my doctor said something like only 8 other people shared my particular type. So, some of these things, unfortunately, the subsets of them are rare enough where there are not specific treatments that are able to be formed for these particular subsets yet. So we might be put on a more generalized treatment, which is what my mitochondrial dysfunction was, on a general mitococktail for people who have an unspecified type of mitochondrial disease. And it's been helpful, but it wouldn't be as helpful if my type was fully defined and I had a specific treatment for it, if that makes sense. So we can narrow down the list, with some diagnostics, with some clinical assessments, and then from the treatment end, doing some confirmation, right? Like when it comes to mast cell disorders, that's a lot of the picture, right? Is, do the treatments help? Then that helps confirm, at least with MCAS. But, I think that basically the challenge is, going to be able to continue to emphasize that it's a matter of doing all of these things, and it's a matter of clinicians and researchers being aware of all of these things and not just the patients. I think that, like we were discussing earlier, when it comes down to medical research, we want people to be able to know about these things, but also there's, the concern about too much information, potentially oversaturating studies, and, then causing issues with clinical trials or studies, being not as helpful, or even saying okay, we have to step away from this particular trial because we overly influenced the responses of the trial participants, right? Or the feedback, or someone said this about this condition or this treatment, and then people thought this as a direct result, right? And so I think that's kind of a difficult situation here, because they're all in these particular conditions. There are only so many clinicians and researchers, and a lot of them do both. And so trying to have these conversations in a way that doesn't endanger the clinical trials that we need to move forward, and the research that we need to move forward, is important, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense, but I think there's kind of a way to balance these needs. And for example, the letter that was sent by Renegade and other orgs to the NIH, asking them to do phenotypic subgrouping, just to record whether patients meet MCAS criteria or POTS criteria or whatever criteria in trials, I think is important.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the subtypes, do you know, or is it possible for you to suspect if a patient has one or more types of POTS, right? Like,
Yeah.
generally there are 3 to 4 types of POTS, and it's possible to have more than one type, and how many types you have or what type you have might influence how well a treatment does for you, or if you need it at all. So, that is an important part of the conversation. Yeah.
And I think one thing that kind of kept being brought up, and I kind of think that the NIH didn't demonstrate a sufficient understanding of, although they seem to understand that there is a great demand for it, is PEM and the MECFS subtype in particular, because it's clear that long COVID is triggering PEM and MECFS, or PEN-A or whatever, in some people. And I think Todd Davenport actually posted about this today, but I agree with him that I would expect those of us who have the ME subtype to not necessarily respond as well to treatments that other long COVID patients might respond to, or there's also something common that we share with other non-long COVID ME patients. So kind of the thing that I think needs to be done in light of all this, there's a lot of like complexity, and you can also have things like viral persistence, for example, like causing many different manifestations in people. In light of all this, I think what's really needed is a broader, like an establishment of a broader field that encompasses all of these related illnesses, whether it's infection triggered or triggered by environmental factors or triggered by concussions or whatever, and to like understand, to first of all, to like build up diagnostics and biomarkers and understanding of pathology across these different disease entities or disease models, to allow like differentiation between them, to look for overlaps in terms of like in individual patients, but also overlaps in pathology, if there's shared pathology across these patients. And I think the impression I got from RFK at the roundtable was that he actually does seem interested in these subjects, which kind of maybe knew about already. That he does seem interested in these subjects beyond like what we might have expected of a previous HHS head or a previous CDC or NIH head. And so I know like the political environment is not like great right now for like funding, as Megan said, but I think like establishing a broader field here could be really helpful for like even clarifying long COVID and what long COVID research is, but also like important for like not leaving all these other diseases behind. And like,
Yeah, am I mistaken, or did he suggest starting a particular like sub-department specifically for IICCs? Am I remembering that correctly? Did that happen, or is that like a fever
was that
dream
at
that
the
I had?
roundtable?
It might not have been at the roundtable, but might have been in the last month or so. I think I remember seeing that
I don't know.
somewhere.
If you do find that, I'd be super interested to see that. Yeah, I'm just kind of going by like what he said about doing a Lyme roundtable next week, and he also like brought up mold, which I never
Right.
expected anyone, like any HHS head, to ever bring up. And that's had like no research. So I feel like if we go to him, or we try to go to, I don't really know how we would do this. So I would appreciate any ideas, but I think like pushing for an establishment of a larger field that can like actually fund and attend to all of these illnesses would be super helpful, and I think that now could be like a good time, paradoxically.
Yeah, I know Megan had said that she was the person that they referenced when they said, a patient came up to me and she expressed how much she's been struggling, and, you know, could we really get together urgently and try to do more to address this? And she was the person that they were talking about. So I do think that we have some, you know, direct relationships in the community, you know, deeper relationships than we have in the past, that I think we could try to have the most momentum we could have. You know, I think that a lot of the stuff that we're seeing too, like the neuromuscular impacts in ME/CFS, right, and how those relate to other post-infectious neuromuscular issues, how some of those symptoms could also be, you know, mechanical neurosurgical issues causing and worsening some of that stuff. I think that there's slowly becoming a greater understanding of those things as well. You know, like the energy disabilities are such a huge part of activity and exercise limitations and inaccessibility, but also when it comes to the structural mechanical basis stuff, like the spinal issues and the neuromuscular issues are also a huge concern for that. And like for the first time, I was offered access to like a neurophysical therapist recently, despite having these issues for several years now, you know, by the local university clinic. So I feel like, you know, from conversations locally and nationally I've had with folks, there's a greater awareness of it's not just the energy impacts, it is these other very significant, common enough impacts that we're seeing structurally within patients that are occurring, that are persistent, that we see worsening after infections. Typically, the symptoms get worse after reinfections, not just with COVID, but, you know, with other infections or with reactivations, right? Like how COVID reactivates Epstein-Barr virus and other infections. So I feel like, you know, immunologists have made this connection as well. Traditionally, this stuff, you know, NIH used to kind of try to house all of this under immunology because it was, you know, immune associated. But I feel like more people are starting to realize, okay, we should not be doing that. We should not be trying to silo this off. So, I mean, I think seeing these trends nationally, locally, not just in patient spaces, but, you know, commonly discussed in these government meetings more frequently in clinician roundtables is encouraging because people are understanding how holistic all of this is.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that, can you just hear me, just to make sure?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was thinking that, like, dividing, like at the NIH, there were representatives from the NIH proper, there's representatives from NIAID, representatives from NINS, and cordoning off, like, the immunological stuff from the neurological stuff doesn't really make a lot of sense. And obviously there's collaboration happening between those two divisions, which is great, but seeing like a whole new field of, I don't want to say IACCs because it's not just infectious triggers, but you kind of know what I mean. We're always like lacking for a good name.
Yeah, I mean, I've been calling it IACCs, but immune associated chronic conditions, because, you know, that's kind of more comprehensive, I think, than infection associated. Because most of it is infection, to be fair, but there are also other immune events like pregnancy, childbirth, puberty that, you know, kicks off and worsens a lot of these things. And, you know, a lot of those things are worth consideration.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And yeah, just like I said, like having a whole new field birthed out of this, with ring-fenced funding, with like the ability for researchers and clinicians to like work together and learn from one another, with like journals dedicated to the topic, with like divisions in biology schools and medical schools dedicated to this. I think that would be really, really great. And something I'd like to see. And like I said, I think it would be good for COVID research too, in terms of like disambiguating all the complexity that is inherent in long COVID diagnosis and what happens when your immune system goes haywire. And also like would be good for like obviously like long COVID out of all of the IACCs is getting the most research funding, and within long COVID almost no funding is going to like assessing PEM or ME/CFS subtypes. So it's clear that these other mechanisms, these other disease models have to be funded too.
Yeah, and I think like the, folks from the government have been pretty consistent about they do see this all as one umbrella. Like that's pretty intentional that they're trying to drive funding all through, long COVID discussions, even if it's not specifically for long COVID. Like there are a lot of MECFS researchers, like you brought up Todd Davenport. I think he's had like 7 or 8 research papers, and that's so like coming from MECFS researchers and clinicians, fully funded by MECFS folks, like, 7 or 8 papers about long COVID issues, specifically like driving like MECFS issues inherent in long COVID. So there definitely is an understanding in the MECFS community that like helping everybody helps everybody. And I'm hoping to see that same kind of, courtesy and intelligence expressed across mold, across Lyme, across, Guillain-Barré, across Gulf War, across all of these other things that people have suffered from for so long. Historically, when we look back at medical research papers from like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we look at what people were researching for POTS and researching for MECFS and confusing them both because they didn't understand, that these were necessarily different things or the differences in different patient cases. It was very interesting to look back at some of the old research papers, because it wasn't until, as some of us know, until 30 years ago that a lot of the biophysical arguments started to be expressed into these are just fully psychiatric things and we should lean more into mental health stuff. And so I think that kind of slowed down the history of a lot of biophysical evidence and proof that we had, some of which was, well over a century old. And so I do think that kind of bringing those sources to clinicians has made them more interested in this stuff. When I've brought those papers to clinicians, those, research papers that some folks have written as part of their dissertations, I think more people have been interested because they understand this to have a deeper history that's much more complex and interesting than they would have originally thought. And when people are actually interested, they'll stay more involved. So yeah, I don't know. I'm really hoping that, this HHS administration's willingness to kind of continue to highlight all of these things drives a greater intersectionality and awareness, especially since so many of us have multiples of these things, right? Like there are folks who have long COVID, who have HIV, who have dysautonomias, who have mechanical neurosurgical issues. Like there are so many of us who are not just dealing with like one plate at the table, but like stacked plates on the table or scattered across the table. And then we're just trying to help each other build the relationships and the knowledge bases that we need and the connections that we need to actually build on those knowledge bases. And so, it does sometimes concern me, some of the questions or the lack of science educated information that's coming from these meetings. But I am encouraged by the fact that the speakers have continued to have a great insight and a breadth of knowledge and to really stay on focus. And I do feel like some of these places, just for instance, Puccino Lab, right, at Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai just happens to be really, for some of these clinicians and their teams and the clinical trials that they're doing are, right? I mean, in that region, there are just a lot of different clinical trials and, organized teams of clinicians. It's just a high traffic medical region in general. And I don't know if that will be the future, if we're going to continue to see concierge medicine that's focused in like a way where there's an entire like clinic that has like different specialists who are aware about how all these intersecting things impact multiple specialties, right? Where we're not just like trying to draw specialists to each other, but they are working on an integrated team that's built into a specific medical facility. You know, some of that already exists, like RTHM has going out of multiple states, something to that effect. But, I do think that we will need the government's help, unfortunately, and definitely funding. I feel like a lot of the medical funding that's been diverted this year has made people feel pretty uncertain and even like scared about what the futures for our landscapes of conditions will be. And so I think that continuing to have these conversations at these roundtables, hopefully will, I guess, secure our futures as best as we can, because we have to do this. I think, unfortunately, a lot of clinicians are kind of the last to find out sometimes. Like medical schools are even further behind government agencies when it comes to receiving information and updating information and integrating that information and training people. And so, I do think the urgency, like the drive, will have to continue to be from patients and from researchers. So
Kind of to your earlier point about like bringing literature to doctors and then having them be receptive, I definitely have not found that works at all. I found that really puts them off. But something that I thought was really interesting was when Petrino talked about, I think at the HHS meeting, he talked about how he went on like a tour on the West Coast, and I don't know who was attending his talks, but he said that like going into the meetings, 30% of the audience, which were doctors or clinicians, 30% of them didn't believe in like long COVID and IACCs. And I love the immune associated chronic condition term that you use, by the way. But 30% of them didn't believe in long COVID or IACCs. And then at the end of it, 100% of them did. So all it took was presenting information from another clinician. And I'm sure like the Mount Sinai brand helped. But I think like this like clinical education and this legitimizing of the disease really has to come from the top, because doctors are just not going to consistently listen to us as people.
yeah, like, so in the past, I've had a lot of clinicians who, I mean, maybe they would be even completely open, right, to like having a conversation with another clinician, but they just do not have the time or even the wellness. Some of them have these conditions themselves, so they really don't have the bandwidth to like even read the information I'm buying them, like in a medical book or like a medical research paper I'm sending to them. But some of them do. So basically, it's just figuring out which one or two, I could give them resources to. And like, I'm thinking about one of my clinicians, like he so trusts my, willingness to learn and knowledge about some of these things, where if I say, hey, I'm having a specialist, they don't really know a lot about this. If I send them this paper, I know they're not going to read it. If you send them this paper, I know that they're going to read it. And I'm not saying you have to read it. You can if you want to, but would you be willing to send this paper? And then, or would you reach out? And then, they do. And then it actually happens, right? Like the goal that we're trying to achieve happens. So not everyone might be open to it or willing to, but as long as you can try to find some who are, and that's kind of, the struggle, right, is trying to find a clinician who is actually willing to learn about these conditions and to be knowledgeable about these conditions, even somewhat or a little bit, right, and to actually trusting patient intelligence and knowledge about these conditions, then they can continue to drive the conversation forward. Like, I definitely have had some clinicians who make it very clear that they are not curious about these things. They don't want to learn anything more other than what they learned in medical school. They feel like I should go find some other clinician to continue diagnostic tests or to have conversations about, emerging diagnoses that are common under certain comorbidities. And really the only answer that we can do is say, okay, like, we will go try to find somebody else, right? Because it's clear that we're not going to continue to have care, much less conversations, with those particular people. So, yeah, it is a struggle. I definitely do feel like a lot of these roundtables, whether they're government roundtables or renegade research roundtables, or patient-led, some of the other organizations are very helpful because it's gathering together, one or more clinicians, whether it's here on X or whether it's on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, to have lives in which they're able to have these conversations that are very interesting, and sometimes have Q&As. And that tends to draw, more clinicians out, more researchers out. Suddenly people who have not been interested in joining a conversation or learning anything for years are more interested. Like, I'm thinking about a PCP I had back in like 2020, and she did not know anything about these conditions at all. And then COVID happened, and then, oh my God, she has so many patients with these conditions. And then I gave her a copy of Disjointed, and she read the whole thing, and then she exclusively started diagnosing and treating these conditions. And so it was kind of like a convergence of events. But she realized that for her clinic, even just financially standing, like, she lean into this, that's financially profited them a lot. Like, I think Vaughn said his clinic has like exploded with growth, and they have a lot of people working under him at this point, and it's because he and RTHM, they're the only people doing severe microclot testing and treatment in the whole country, unless you can get into a clinical trial, right? And when the options are continue to have life-threatening clotting events, that and see where that goes, right? Or try to get care somewhere and try to get tested if you can. I mean, people will do what they have to do. So, yeah, it is definitely really hard, especially because we only have so much time, money, and energy to, reach out to different clinicians to try to build upon a referral and see if it goes anywhere. And so I think the best focus is to continue to drive donations, drive money, to the organizations that are already doing this work in a concentrated, targeted way, right? To keep the information, keep the pressure, keep the connections, keep the research funding going. And also to be specific about building on clinician relationships that are willing to do that. I see some clinicians on here who generally, if they see, a patient is getting much worse, right? They will be like, oh, maybe this clinician might be able to help, if you're able to like afford and reach out to that clinician, right? Which then at least gives the patient the opportunity for themselves or them and their loved ones to try to fundraise to get access to that clinician, to see if that clinician can help, right? So there are some, I think, deeply caring clinicians and researchers, who are trying to stay a part of patient communities and literally trying to keep us alive. And I think it's important to just continue to try to, I guess, feed that back at them, because as long as they can continue their work and can continue to do the same sort of stuff that these organizations like Renegade Research are doing, driving, funding, pressure, keeping up information, protocols, I think that's the most efficient way that we can try to progress things. Sorry, I've been sitting up for long enough, so talking is getting harder.
I actually just wanted to ask one question. Since I assume you've been around longer than me, but what you said about fundraising, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, just connection issues. What you said about fundraising is really interesting to me because I'm looking at, I've been seeing what We and Me MECFS, or what We and MECFS Foundation is doing in Austria. I think it's Gabrielle Stroke running that. And like what interests me about it is that they're like doing these little events and like these little fundraising dinners and these like 5K runs or whatever exactly it is they're doing. And it reminds me a lot of like kind of the breast cancer model of things. So they're like putting on these events involving the broader community, raising money. And maybe it's not a ton of money in the scheme of like what we need, or like in the scheme of like what an organization like the NIH can fund, but it's enough money to like move things forward, like smaller research projects forward at least, if not larger projects. And also it kind of drives more awareness in the community and more legitimacy about the disease in the in like the broader community among people who would otherwise like have no idea that ME or long COVID even exists. And I'm just wondering if that's something that's ever happened with like any of these IACCs. It's something that I feel like there's a lot of us with long COVID, and we have we have various funding mechanisms. We have the NIH, which seems to be kind of running out unless something changes. We have like ARPA-H. I don't know what other funding mechanisms exist within the federal government or within the state governments. We have like these private philanthropic foundations which are providing quite a bit of money, and that's useful, but then like we're relying on them to like choose the research that is most useful. Whereas something like these kind of patient-led advocacy events to me seem really interesting, because not maybe they have like a lower capacity to like raise money individually, but like on at scale they can maybe be more useful, and then like I said, drive awareness and legitimacy in the community. But then also that allows patients to kind of have more control over where money is going and what studies and what research and what trials they're interested in funding. So I'm just wondering if you know of that being implemented with IACCs in general, because I feel like that's a really useful model for us to follow.
Yeah, I feel like we need both, because, having these patient-led organizations, or even organizations that, might not completely be patient-led, but, are patient-initiated, and they have a board, and then patients make up half the board, or like whatever the situation is. They continue to drive advocacy and do research funding, like Dysautonomia International, ME Action, the Mast Cell Society. There's even some organizations that specifically give patient needs scholarships, where you can apply for like patient scholarships or financial aid if you have a condition every year. Like the Patient Advocacy Foundation has several different grants, but there are like also organization specifics set up for specific conditions. Like I'm thinking of a mast cell organization that I got a patient scholarship grant for. Like last year, I think it was, that people can apply for. So those things are incredibly helpful, because I do agree that it's helpful that there's a community democratic process, right, where people are able to suggest the trends that they're noticing across research papers, across patient communities, clinician observations and care, and then focus what they feel like the most urgent needs are at the time, and then people are able to like dedicate funding. So like some of the projects that came out of Renegade Research did exactly that, like you mentioned. And Patient Led did the same thing. And I do think that it's important though that we try to reinstate some of the government funding mechanisms and keep up an emphasis to do that, because we never know what random research project that could be for something else entirely, like a condition that has nothing to do with us, and they might be trialing a specific treatment, right? And then, oh gosh, this could be used to treat one of the conditions that we have, right? Or this random scientific observation can then suddenly lead to better symptom outcomes for, this community of patients with these conditions. I think like some of the specific criticisms, even that RFK or other people, in his orbit had like made about government funded research. They were like, oh, this is such a random government research project. Why do we fund this? And then you actually look at the impacts of that random research project that seemed really silly. And it ended up helping so many people because they made unexpected discoveries that like had this massive trickle down effect. So, it's true that like we have so many important community connections that patient-led research helps with, that I think, as with any scientific project, there's always going to be stuff outside of people's expectations and scope, right? Whether they're clinicians, researchers, or patients. And so I think having, government funded channels is still deeply important, and not even just like local or federal government, but like international collaborative research projects, I think would be incredibly helpful if we could get governments to kind of accept that the pandemic is not over, it's not going to go away anytime soon, that the impacts are going to be lasting for decades, and then to kind of, put their money where their mouth is and to create like an integrated, like basically research fund. And I don't know if they want to make that under the UN, if they want to like find some other sort of international, way of organizing that. But I think that that's absolutely necessary because it's basically going to ensure that there's going to be an international agency that is able to continue to drive fundraising, drive urgency, regardless of who is elected in whatever nation, and how that might impact researchers in those nations. That there's going to be like an ongoing, I don't know, commitment, if that makes sense, globally. And in that way, I do think some of these patient-led organizations can be incredibly helpful because we are not just from any particular nation, right? The people who are involved in Renegade Research are from multiple countries. The people that are involved in a lot of these other small patient-led organizations, even, some of the journalism ones are from different nations, are from different ethnicities, are from different demographics. And so I think continuing to drive the emphasis that we need the attention on different demographics, on different nations, is incredibly important. Like I some of the patients who have been volunteers with, ME Action are from very neglected regions in the world. And they've continued to do volunteer work, shining light on how patients in South America or patients, in Asia or patients in the Middle East are like severely neglected, and how there's nobody, like not even one specialist for any of these conditions in their neck of the woods, and how physically difficult and expensive it is to try to travel to even just get care for one of these conditions or surgeries for one of these conditions. And so, I think in that particular way, the international emphasis of it all, patient-led organizations are going to continue to be, I think, more helpful than any of the particular, at least so far, they've been more helpful and better at emphasizing this than any of our governments. Like I haven't really seen any of our governments sit up and say, we should create an international body and then like dump money into the international body, Like they say, okay, we'll send our money to our particular health agencies, right? Like NHS or NIH. but they don't really have like an integrated global focus, which is unfortunate.
That's actually a really interesting idea and one that I like a lot. The other thing with like, I agree that we need like all funding mechanisms as well, because there's obviously an amount of funding that governments can provide that patients can never really or are unlikely to be able to raise on their own, even together. But yeah, I just came up to like say that, and I'm probably gonna head out now. And it was lovely talking to you. Yeah, bye. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've done a lot of fundraising in the past professionally, and I've helped people out doing personal fundraisers in the past. I had to step back from personal fundraising recently because it's a lot of work for someone with severe ME/CFS to try to help other folks out with. But I'm hoping to continue to help professional organizations with their fundraising more to try to like centralize momentum. So I don't know, personally, that's kind of my goal in the next year. But it is really difficult sometimes with fundraising because you really do have to open up so many different avenues of fundraising. Like you never know who's going to be interested in coming to you and why, right? Or to an organization and why. Um, it could be some very specific thing that like you wouldn't typically think of. Like I know earlier in the conversation, Bitcoin came up. Like some people might not care at all about long COVID, but they might be like really interested in Bitcoin. So I don't know, maybe making a long COVID book Bitcoin could be, who knows. But there's just like for instance, some of the people I know who have donated to these things, like the guy who created Ethereum, he like donated a lot of money for long COVID. You know, he was personally impacted by that. But all the people who donated to long COVID research because he had long COVID, right? And they all followed him, right? Because of Ethereum stuff. So they were Bitcoin world people. Like they would not have come to it if not for the fact that they were so invested in Bitcoin and so invested in what he was doing. And he was like, I think this is a really great investment opportunity in like our health communities, and people should care more about, long COVID and how all of this is going to be impacting us in the next 10 years. So, there are very specific things in some communities. And I think basically being open to all avenues, like potential avenues of interest in fundraising as possible is helpful. So, but yeah, does anyone else want to come up and speak? I know we have some new people, I think, too. I just want to recommend Reamerville to go up and speak because, especially since you said that you're good at this fundraising stuff, and that's kind of like your goal in the next year. I know Reamer is good at that stuff as well, and I think you two should connect.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, one of the things, like, I'm come on board as a Renegade Research volunteer, and one of the things I'm really hoping in the next year is to help out with some specific fundraising stuff because I do really think that these patient-led organizations, and the work that they do are so critical to moving things forward. Like, I also volunteer for Just Autonomy International, and I also lead my state support groups for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So, I think continuing to drive concentrated efforts in small communities, being able to gather together the people who care about us and, show our value to people, whether we can work or not. Like we still have tremendous economic value just as consumers. And so people should recognize that at least, when it comes to disability justice stuff. I think that all of that is incredibly helpful. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk to anybody else who is already involved as a volunteer for Renegade Research who wants to volunteer more. I know each of us kind of have different capacity levels and talents and experiences for different things. And I'm super happy to connect with anybody at any time about this stuff.
because it's so important, and I think you all are very important, and I'm very glad that you're here, specifically today, but in general also. Although, unfortunately, this space still keeps kicking people out for some weird reason, I guess. I don't know. People keep coming back in. So if this keeps happening too, I'm sorry. I don't know why this happened. Maybe it's because I didn't create the space, and so the connection for the host might be shaky. I'm not sure. But does anyone else want to come up as a speaker or to ask any questions about the Recover TLC roundtable? Questions, concerns, jokes?
Hello?
Yeah, can hear you. Hey.
Hi. I actually just wanted to say hi, really. And it's nice to stumble across this group. It sounds very informative. I've been sick since 2011 with ME/CFS, so it's interesting to see a lot of the new research and information that's coming out, and more people talking about all of these various overlapping conditions.
Yeah, we've been going for a while now. This one's been going for a few hours. I know we're going to have another clinician roundtable next month. I mentioned that earlier, but there's going to be 3 clinicians next month. I think it's October 17th. And they're going to be discussing GLP-1s and mast cell treatments that clinicians and researchers have uncovered and how that could be helpful in patient spaces. So definitely go over and try to register for that. And
The 17th of October, did you say?
Yeah, October
And
17th, I think.
where would I register for that? And what is a GOPD one?
Yeah, so GLP-1s, typically they're known as like they're injectable medications that have been used a lot for weight loss, but initially, like one was created for diabetes, another was created for obstructive sleep apnea that was moderate to severe, but a lot of people have used them to regulate their endocrine issues, their metabolic issues, and have been able to find helps with weight loss. And so a lot of folks in our patient communities, particularly some people with connective tissue disorders and diseases, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, have been able to find that these medications help them as well. Because a lot of the conditions that we have, like ME/CFS, POTS, mast cell disorders, other dysautonomias, cause issues like glucose processing issues and insulin resistance and limitations or prohibitions on exercising. Things like PEM under ME/CFS are very restrictive. Some people can't exercise at all. And some of us have multiple energy disabilities. So ME/CFS plus something else like a mitochondrial disease or dysfunction. So we really have the deck stacked against us when it comes with exercise and mobility. So, as far as weight loss goes, these have been very helpful things for a lot of patients. And so recently some research came out showing that some specific medications that are GLP-1s have been helpful with mast cell disorders and inflammation from mast cells. And so
MCAS is one of the most common conditions caused by long COVID that vaccine injury patients can also get. That's prominent in connective tissue disorders and diseases. That other infections, post-infection syndrome like long Epstein-Barr virus and long parvovirus, and a lot of post-immune event issues can also cause and worsen, like puberty, pregnancy, childbirth, can also cause and worsen mast cell disorders and dysautonomias. So,
Oh, that's so interesting. Thank you so much. I'm also EDS as well, and connective tissue, and I appreciate that because I'll have a look up. I hadn't heard of that, and I think that's really interesting. And with post-exertional malaise at my illest, I could hardly move or talk or sit up. So I could maybe text with one eye open, but now I can walk around the garden a few times. So that's exciting. But one thing I just wanted to say was that because of our overlapping, and I don't know if this is relevant to you guys or not, but I just wanted to say something if it's helpful to anybody, is that sometimes other conditions get overlooked because of the understanding of chronic illness. If that makes sense, I ended up having major surgery at the beginning of the year, and that has made a lot of difference to me. But it was incredibly hard to be in hospital for 14 days very ill, but it was a different issue, and that was causing inflammation, and they overlooked it a lot because they were just like, you've just got chronic pain, and kind of dismissed me. And I guess why I'm bringing that up is you were talking about lots of different overlapping conditions, and I've been trying to unravel this for nearly 15 years, and it's very hard. And I think a multidisciplinary team, like you were saying, is really necessary. I'm in New Zealand and we don't have access to a lot of the same medical specialists that you guys do. So a lot of my research I've had to do by myself and kind of like try and get help through various different people. I actually had a lymphatic drainage massage for the first time yesterday because I'd read some research that's a really good relief. It helps people with ME/CFS, and I've actually found it really made me feel quite, it really helped. So they might not be relevant for you, but I just thought I would chime in with it.
yeah, I know we were having some discussions about this earlier, and we've a lot of the renegade research spaces, this exact issue comes up with, because I feel like a lot of us have had this as an ongoing issue, right? Where clinicians will target one specific factor causing symptoms, but oftentimes we have multiple things going on and underlying things that might not be realized until much later. And so when it comes to particular symptoms, whether it's pain, whether it's, so many other symptoms, having something not treated or improperly treated because it hasn't been diagnosed or because it's been misdiagnosed can continue to worsen baselines of diagnosed things that we are already trying to treat. And
Yeah, it's quite shocking sometimes the way that you get treated with that, because as a patient, I really know my body, but sometimes people just look at you like you're making it up, and I'm like, it's quite reassuring when you actually get a scan and something's wrong with you, and you're just like, because it's just because something doesn't show on a scan doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? It's just such a strange reality. But I'm because of that complication, I am very lucky to be alive through it. I got very, very ill, and it just kind of shocked me the way that it was looked at because of the chronic illness on the top of it.
Yep. Yeah, I know we've had past roundtables before for Renegade Research. I think you'd be interested.
Yeah,
So
pretty good.
these have been recorded. This one's being recorded. But if you go over to Renegade Research, well, if you want to register for the roundtable on the 17th,
Yep.
if you just go to the Twitter for Renegade Research,
Yep, I'm there
they should
now.
have put the Zoom registration link on the page, so you should be able to find that. But
on the website, do you mean, or on the Twitter page?
I think they should have. Well, it should be on both. It should be on the website, and it should be somewhere on the Twitter page.
Oh, I see. The clinical roundtable Friday, October the 17th. Okay, cool.
Yeah. But on the website, there's recordings of past clinician roundtables.
Oh, amazing.
Some of the mechanical basis ones talking about neurosurgical issues and spinal issues causing venous congestion really talk about this, because even if what's going on does show up on imaging, if you don't have someone who understands how to read the imaging properly, they're going to tell you that there's nothing showing up on the imaging or that it's normal. And it might not be normal in general or specifically with someone who has like Ehlers-Danlos, for instance. So,
that sounds such. I really look forward to listening to those as well. I've got a brain scan that nobody can. I've heard various different things from that's impossible, therefore the scan's not right, to it's terrifying, to you look like you've drowned. So I'm actually, I shouldn't laugh at that, should I? Sorry, it's my way of coping. But I've actually downloaded like 20 gigabyte AI thing that can read the CT scan, so I'm going to try and get it to give me an AI opinion, see what that's like.
yeah, and I know they're trying to, over at Renegade Research, trying to make transcripts of some of the past roundtables, the clinician roundtables that have happened. So hopefully those will get up. I might help out with those. We'll see. I was
Thank you
talking with
so
Ellie.
much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. I won't overtalk. I just really wanted to say hi, and it's really great to find this, and I'll register for the 17th. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think there's only a few people left here, so I might wrap this up unless there's somebody else who wants to ask a question about what happened at the recent, HHS RECOVER TLC roundtable, which was the focus for this particular chat. But yeah, I think I'll wrap this up. I'm a co-host. I'm not sure if I can wrap this up or if the host needs to wrap this up. In any case, I really appreciate everyone who showed up to talk today. It was really great hearing so many different discussions from folks. So many really great ideas, things of urgency and importance that I think we should continue to talk about. And I really hope people show up, next month on October 17th. I think it's going to be a really great discussion. All three clinicians are powerhouses, and they're just such a wealth of information. I recommend folks follow them on Instagram and other social media platforms because their educational videos are just so good. But yeah, I hope to see you all at our next Twitter X Space as well. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.